I am Kendra, 35 years old, and until recently my family believed I was just a struggling squatter taking up space in my own childhood bedroom. At a packed Sunday dinner, my mother slid a handwritten lease across the mahogany table, demanding I pay $1,500 a month to sleep in a twin bed, while my golden child brother lived rent-free in their newly renovated basement. My father pounded his fist, calling my career a pathetic computer hobby and declaring my brother the true legacy of our bloodline. I did not scream or argue. I just packed 2 suitcases and vanished. 30 days later, my mother called me 14 times in a single night, screaming hysterically when she finally learned the truth about who actually owned the mortgage to her pristine suburban house. Before I reveal how one envelope ended their entire game, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to quietly build your empire while your own family prayed for your downfall. The clinking of silverware against fine china stopped abruptly. I had a forkful of collard greens halfway to my mouth when the crisp white envelope slid across the polished dining room table, stopping exactly an inch from my plate. We were in the middle of our traditional Sunday family dinner at my parents' sprawling brick home in the upscale suburbs of Atlanta. My mother Vivian sat at the opposite end of the table. Her posture was rigid, and her chin was tilted upward in that familiar angle of absolute authority. 9 of our relatives, including my aunts and cousins, sat frozen around us, their eyes darting between the envelope and my face. "Open it, Kendra," my mother instructed. Her voice carried the practiced projection of a woman used to directing church choirs and dominating local community boards. I set my fork down and opened the unsealed flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a handwritten lease agreement, stipulating that I owed $1,500 on the first of every month for the privilege of occupying my childhood bedroom on the second floor. A room that still featured the faded pink wallpaper from when I was 12, and a mattress that dug into my spine. "Grown adults need to contribute to the household," my mother announced to the captive audience, ensuring her words echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "We are not running a charity. In this economy, everyone carries their weight. It is time you learned the value of a dollar instead of coasting on our goodwill." From the other end of the table, a distinct snicker broke the heavy silence. My older brother Jamal covered his mouth with a linen napkin, his shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. Next to him sat his wife Brittany. She was a white woman who had seamlessly integrated herself into my family by mastering the art of weaponized politeness and mirroring my mother's condescension. Brittany leaned into Jamal, whispering something that made him chuckle louder. I looked at the lease, then looked up at my mother. I did not recount the years of emotional neglect or the fact that I bought my own groceries and paid my own phone bill since I was 16. I simply pointed my fork toward Jamal's overflowing plate of macaroni and cheese. "Does this household contribution rule apply to the newly renovated basement suite?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Or does Jamal's 6-figure corporate salary make him exempt from the family taxes?" The air in the dining room turned instantly hostile. Jamal stopped laughing. The basement suite was practically a luxury apartment, fully outfitted with a modern kitchen, a walk-in closet, and a private entrance. My parents had spent $50,000 remodeling it specifically for Jamal and Brittany so they could save money for their dream home. They lived there absolutely rent-free. My father, Derek, slammed his heavy fist down on the table, making the water glasses rattle. "You watch your tone in my house," he bellowed, his face tightening with sudden fury. "Your brother is a senior director. He is building a future. He is securing the family legacy. You are 35 years old, sitting upstairs typing on a laptop all day, playing with your little computer hobby. Do not you dare compare your situation to his. He is a provider. You are a burden." The word burden hit the table like a physical weight. My aunts looked down at their plates, suddenly very interested in their sweet potatoes. No one spoke up to defend me. They never did. In the Washington family hierarchy, Jamal was the undisputed king, the golden boy who could do no wrong. I was the dark cloud, the invisible middle child whose very presence seemed to irritate them. Brittany sensed the shift in power and decided to capitalize on it. She offered me a sympathetic pout that was entirely venomous. "You just need to work harder, Kendra," she said, her tone dripping with fake concern. "Jamal practically built his entire department from the ground up. If you just applied yourself and got a real job, maybe you could afford a place of your own. It is just about having a good work ethic. I looked at Brittany's perfectly manicured hands, funded by my parents, generosity, and felt a cold, hard clarity wash over me. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. Built his department from the ground up, I repeated, letting a short, sharp laugh escape my lips. Brittany Jamal only got that director position because Dad called in a massive favor with his fraternity brother on the board. He did not build anything. And speaking of work ethic, let us talk about how I paid my own way through state college by working 3 jobs. I had to do that because Mom drained my college savings account to quietly pay off Jamal's drunk driving settlement so he would not get a criminal record. My mother gasped loudly, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. "You ungrateful, spiteful girl," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the walls. "How dare you bring up family business in front of company? How dare you try to tear down your brother to mask your own failures?" My aunts looked horrified, murmuring among themselves. My father's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "If you do not respect the hierarchy of this family, I will personally throw your belongings onto the front lawn tonight," he threatened, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You will sign that paper and pay what you owe, or you will find out exactly how cold it gets outside." I could have screamed. I could have cried. I could have told them how wrong they were. But I knew that anger was the exact reaction they wanted. They craved my emotional unraveling because it validated their narrative that I was unstable and difficult. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out my checkbook. I tore out a blank check. I picked up the expensive silver pen Brittany had slid down the length of the mahogany table just moments before. I felt the cold metal against my fingers, feeling the heavy stares of 9 relatives waiting for me to submit to my designated role as the family failure. I tapped the pen against the table once, twice, holding the silence until the tension became almost unbearable. I did not sign the lease. I wrote out the check for exactly $1,500. I signed my name with slow, deliberate strokes. I folded the check once and slid it under my father's plate. "Enjoy the contribution," I said, my voice eerily calm against the backdrop of their outrage. "It is the last dime you will ever get from me." The heavy oak dining table fell so silent you could hear the ice shifting in the crystal pitchers of sweet tea. My mother stared at the folded check resting beneath my father's plate as if it were a live grenade. The absolute audacity of me paying her extortion fee without a single tear or plea completely short-circuited her script. She wanted me to beg. She wanted me to break down and apologize for being a burden so she could magnanimously forgive me while keeping her boot on my neck. Instead, I gave her exactly what she asked for, and it felt like a slap to her face. Jamal's smirk vanished. He shifted in his seat, the leather of his expensive dining chair squeaking loudly in the quiet room. But it was his wife Brittany who decided to break the silence. Brittany had this infuriating habit of using soft corporate human resources language to deliver the most venomous insults. She placed her pale hand over Jamal's arm and looked at me with a perfectly practiced expression of pity. "Kendra, there is absolutely no need to be so hostile with your parents," Brittany said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "They are just trying to help you grow up. You just need to work harder." Jamal practically built his entire department from the ground up through sheer determination. If you just applied yourself and got a real job, instead of hiding in your bedroom playing on your computer, you could afford a place of your own. It is just about having a good work ethic. I looked at Brittany. I looked at her perfectly styled blonde hair, the diamond tennis bracelet catching the light from the chandelier, and the smug certainty in her eyes. She genuinely believed her husband was a self-made king. She genuinely believed I was the lazy, resentful sister dragging down the Washington family name. I took a slow, deep breath. The anger I had swallowed for 15 years rose up in my chest, but it did not come out as a scream. It came out as pure, unadulterated truth. "Built his department from the ground up," I repeated, my voice steady and echoing clearly across the long table. "Brittany, your husband is a glorified paperweight." Jamal's face flushed a deep, angry purple. "Keep my career out of your mouth, Kendra," he snapped. I did not even look at him. I kept my eyes locked on Brittany. "Your husband did not build anything," I told her. "He failed the executive competency exam twice. The only reason he has that director title is because my father called in a massive favor with his fraternity brother who sits on the corporate board. Dad begged them to create a redundant position just so his precious son could have a corner office. Jamal is a diversity hire for his own father's ego. Several of my aunts gasped. Aunt Patrice, who was sitting 2 seats down from me, slowly lowered her fork, her eyes darting between my father and Jamal. My father's face contorted with rage, the veins in his neck bulging against his starched white collar. "That is a lie!" Vivian shrieked, slamming both her hands flat on the table. "How dare you speak about your brother's blessings like that? How dare you sit at my table and try to tear down his success just because you are jealous and stagnant? You should be ashamed of yourself." "Blessings?" I asked, turning my gaze to my mother. "Is that what we are calling it now? Because where I come from, we call it theft." Vivian froze. A flicker of genuine panic crossed her face, but I was not going to stop. "Not this time. Let us talk about work ethic, Brittany," I said, raising my voice so every single relative at the table could hear me loud and clear. "Let us talk about why I had to work the graveyard shift at a diner and take on double course loads at a state school just to get my degree. Let us talk about why I did not get to go to a private university like my brilliant brother here." "Kendra, shut your mouth right now," my father ordered, half rising from his chair. "No, I am going to finish," I said, standing up to match his height. "When I was 18 years old, I had $50,000 sitting in a college savings account. Money I had earned from academic scholarships and money my grandparents had left for me. Do you want to know where it went, Brittany? Do you want to know how your husband afforded to keep his pristine record?" Jamal looked like he was going to be sick. He tried to grab Brittany's arm, but she pulled away, staring at me. "He crashed his car into a storefront while driving completely intoxicated," I revealed, watching the color drain from Brittany's face. "He could have gone to jail. He could have ruined his precious legacy." So my mother went to the bank. She forged my signature on the custodial transfer documents and drained every single penny of my college fund to quietly pay an out-of-court settlement to the business owner. She stole my future to buy Jamal a clean slate. The dining room erupted. Aunt Patrice turned to my mother, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Vivian, tell me she is making this up. Tell me you did not steal from this girl." My mother scrambled to her feet, her breathing erratic. "She is ungrateful. She is a spiteful, hateful girl. I am your mother. It was family money. We had to protect your brother. You survived, did not you? Look at you trying to ruin a beautiful Sunday dinner with ancient history just because you are too lazy to pay your fair share today." She pointed a trembling finger at me, tears of manufactured victimization welling in her eyes. "I did what a mother has to do to protect her family. You have always been so selfish, Kendra. Always keeping score, always playing the victim." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. There was no love in her eyes, only a desperate need to maintain her image in front of her sisters and nieces. She had convinced herself that sacrificing my life to cushion Jamal's mistakes was a noble act of parenting. My father kicked his chair back violently. The heavy wood crashed onto the hardwood floor. He marched around the table, stopping just inches from my face. His sheer size was meant to intimidate me, a tactic that had worked when I was a teenager, but I was 35 years old now, and I was entirely done being afraid of him. "You will not disrespect the hierarchy of this family in my house." Derek spat, his voice dropping to a dangerous, vibrating low. "You will not humiliate your brother in front of his wife, and you will not speak to your mother like she is some common thief. You owe us your life. If you do not learn your place right now, I will walk upstairs, grab every piece of computer junk and cheap clothing you own, and throw it all over the front lawn for the entire neighborhood to see." The threat hung heavily in the air. In their minds, they held all the power. They believed I was trapped in that faded blue bedroom, dependent on their roof, reliant on their conditional charity. They thought threatening my physical shelter would force me to drop to my knees and apologize. I looked at my father's furious face, then at Jamal, who was actively avoiding eye contact with his confused and horrified wife. Finally, I looked at my mother, who stood with her chin raised, waiting for me to break. I smiled. It was not a happy smile, but a cold, finalized realization of my own freedom. "Save your energy, Dad," I said calmly. "You do not need to throw my things out. I will not be spending another night under this roof. I turned my back on all of them, ignoring the shocked gasps from my extended family, and walked out of the dining room. I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, for the very last time, the sound of their arguing echoing up the stairwell behind me. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally pushed the family failure out into the cold, harsh world. They had absolutely no idea what I was about to unleash upon them. They cashed the check on Monday morning. They confused my compliance with surrender, entirely ignoring the warning I gave them about it being my last dime. They took my silence over the next 6 days as proof that their bullying had worked. They believed they had successfully forced the difficult, struggling daughter back into her designated place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. Now it is exactly 7 days later, Sunday morning. At this exact moment, my mother is sitting in the very front pew of our community church. She is wearing a custom-tailored emerald green suit, her hands raised in performative worship while the pastor preaches passionately about the sanctity of family and unconditional love. My father is sitting right beside her, with his chest puffed out, soaking in the respectful nods from the deacons who view him as a pillar of the community. Jamal and Brittany are sitting shoulder to shoulder, playing the roles of the perfect, successful young couple. They are all bathing in the congregation's absolute adoration, entirely convinced that their empire is secure and their authority is absolute. They are terribly wrong. While they are standing in church singing hymns about grace, I am standing in the center of that faded pink bedroom with a heavy-duty black trash bag in one hand. The house is completely silent save for the low hum of the central air conditioning. I move with methodical precision. There is no sadness in my chest. There are no tears threatening to spill. I open my closet doors and look at the miserable collection of clothing lined up on cheap wire hangers. The closet is filled with ill-fitting slacks, scratchy beige cardigans, and clearance rack blouses in drab, lifeless colors. These were the clothes my mother frequently brought home for me over the years. She would drop plastic shopping bags on my bed and say she found some things that suited my situation. It was her insidious way of controlling my image, forcing me to dress like a woman who had given up on herself, ensuring I would never visually compete with Jamal's designer suits or Brittany's expensive boutique dresses. She wanted me to look exactly how she felt about me. I do not pack a single piece of it. I leave every drab, humiliating garment hanging right there in the dark. They belong to a version of me that no longer exists. Instead, I turn my attention to the corner of the room, to the items my father had routinely threatened to throw onto the front lawn. My real assets. I pull out 3 reinforced shock-proof travel cases. Inside the first, I carefully place my primary workstation, a sleek machine with enough processing power to run a small bank. Into the second case go my heavily encrypted backup drives and proprietary hardware servers. My parents always dismissed this equipment as my pathetic little computer hobby. They had absolutely no idea that these silent, blinking black boxes were the operational backbone of a disruptive financial technology platform I had built entirely from scratch. They did not know these servers held the proprietary code that was currently revolutionizing peer-to-peer lending on a global scale. They looked at my equipment and saw a waste of space. I look at it and see the empire I quietly built while they were busy praising my brother for his inherited mediocrity. I secure the heavy latches on the travel cases. The metallic clicks echo sharply in the empty room. I strip the thin, uncomfortable blankets off the twin bed and fold them neatly at the foot of the mattress. Then I reach into my jacket pocket and pull out the handwritten lease agreement my mother had so dramatically presented exactly 1 week ago. I smooth out the creases and lay the piece of paper perfectly flat in the dead center of the bare mattress. Next, I reach into my purse and pull out my house key. The brass is heavily worn down from years of use. For 15 years, this key had unlocked the side kitchen door, the designated entrance for the family burden, while Jamal and his guests were always welcomed through the grand front foyer. I place the worn brass key right in the center of the lease agreement, using it as a paperweight to hold down their delusions of control. It is a completely silent resignation. There will be no shouting match, no slammed doors, no desperate pleas for their love or understanding. just cold hard absence. I grip the handles of my travel cases and roll them out of the room. The durable rubber wheels glide smoothly across the hallway floor and bump softly down the carpeted stairs. I walk through the formal dining room past the mahogany table where they tried to break my spirit and step into the front foyer. I open the heavy oak front door and step outside. The morning air is crisp and unseasonably warm. A sleek black luxury transport SUV is already idling in the driveway waiting for me. The driver steps out immediately, offering a polite nod as he moves to the back of the vehicle to load my heavy cases into the trunk. I step out onto the front porch and pull the door shut behind me. The deadbolt clicks into place with a heavy final thud. I do not look back at the brick facade. I do not look back at the manicured lawn or the large bay windows I used to stare out of as a lonely teenager. I simply pull my smartphone from my pocket. The screen recognizes my face and unlocks instantly. I bypass my messages and open a highly secured wealth management application. The dark interface loads, pulling live financial data from my holding company, Apex Holdings LLC. The screen refreshes and the numbers flash in stark, undeniable green. The total balance reads exactly $8.5 million. I take a slow, steady breath, letting the reality of that massive number wash over me. But I am not just looking at my liquid assets. I swipe left on the screen to open my pending transactions dashboard. A new high-priority notification sits at the very top of the list. It reads Real Estate Acquisition Pending Final Bank Approval. It is the massive portfolio of distressed debt containing the 3 secret mortgages my parents took out on the very house I just walked out of. I lock my phone screen, slide it back into my pocket, and step into the waiting car. The driver pulls away from the curb, and I leave the Washington family hierarchy entirely in the rearview mirror. The 30 days that followed evaporated, leaving behind a digital trail of my family's relentless arrogance. I sat at the head of a massive frosted glass table, my phone resting silently next to my coffee cup. The screen illuminated every few minutes with a new notification from the Washington family group chat. I had not blocked their numbers. I wanted to see exactly who they were when they thought I was utterly defeated. My mother Vivian had taken to posting daily updates about her spiritual rejuvenation. Her messages were masterpieces of passive-aggressive warfare. She sent a photo of a burning bundle of sage resting on a crystal tray, with the caption, "Finally cleansing the toxic energy from the second floor." A home should be a sanctuary of gratitude, not a shelter for resentment. My aunts replied with praying hands and heart emojis validating her completely fabricated victimhood. But Brittany was the one truly capitalizing on my absence. I tapped the screen to open her latest Instagram story. The video started with Brittany wearing matching pastel workout gear, holding a sledgehammer, with an exaggerated, breathless smile. She was standing in the center of my former bedroom. The twin bed was gone. The desk where I had spent 10,000 hours coding was gone. Behind her, Jamal was actively ripping down the faded pink wallpaper I had stared at since I was a child. "We are manifesting new spaces today," Brittany chirped to her followers, flipping the camera to show the gutted room. Out with the heavy, stagnant energy, and in with the light. We are turning this neglected little box into my personal yoga and wellness sanctuary. Because when toxic things remove themselves from your life, the universe rewards you with room to stretch. Jamal cheered in the background, flexing his biceps for the camera, before tearing down another strip of paper. They were expanding their rent-free territory, from the basement to the second floor, claiming every inch of my history, to build their playground. They were completely intoxicated by the illusion of their own control, absolutely certain I was currently weeping on a friend's couch, crushed by the weight of their rejection. I locked my phone and slid it away. The contrast between their petty suburban theater and my actual reality was almost poetic. I was not weeping. I was sitting in the corner boardroom of the top floor of a downtown Atlanta high-rise. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, but my attention was focused on the holographic display projected at the center of the table. Marcus, my lead software engineer, pushed his glasses up his nose as he expanded a massive data visualization chart. "The transaction volume is scaling faster than our initial projections. Kendra, he said, pointing to a graph that looked like a hockey stick pointing straight up. We integrated the new machine learning algorithms you finalized last month, and our peer-to-peer lending platform is currently processing over 200,000 microtransactions an hour. We are effectively bypassing traditional banking fees for small businesses at a rate the market has never seen. I nodded, scanning the raw data. This was the pathetic little computer hobby my father had screamed about, while my family thought I was hiding in my room playing games and avoiding real work. I had been building the foundational architecture for a financial technology platform designed to dismantle predatory lending practices. I had spent 15 years quietly writing code, studying market gaps, and securing patents, while they praised Jamal for wearing a suit to a mid-level management job he did not even earn. The Series B funding cleared escrow this morning. Sarah, my chief financial officer, announced from the other end of the table. Her voice carried the weight of pure victory. $45 million in venture capital is officially sitting in the corporate account. The investors are practically throwing money at us. They know you have built a unicorn, Kendra. Your valuation just crossed the $500 million mark. $500 million. I let the number settle in the quiet hum of the boardroom. My mother had handed me a handwritten lease for $1,500, convinced she was teaching me the value of a dollar. My father threatened to throw my servers onto the lawn, completely unaware he was threatening to destroy hardware that held the keys to generational wealth. They had demanded I respect the hierarchy, completely blind to the fact that I had already built an empire that eclipsed our entire bloodline. Great work, everyone, I said, leaning back in my ergonomic leather chair. Lock in the server upgrades and prepare the press release for the funding round. We go public with the news on Monday. As the executive team filed out of the glass-walled room, the heavy oak door swung open. David, my lead corporate acquisitions attorney, walked in. He did not look like a man bringing regular updates. His tie was loosened, his sleeves were rolled up, and he carried a thick, heavy manila envelope in his right hand. The physical weight of it stood in stark contrast to the flimsy piece of paper my mother had slid across the dining room table 30 days ago. David walked the length of the boardroom, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the polished concrete floor. He stopped at the head of the table and dropped the thick envelope directly in front of me. The heavy thud echoed in the large room. I looked down at the unsealed flap, then up at David's face. We utilized the blind proxy shell corporation, just as you instructed, David said, a sharp predatory smile forming on his lips. The holding company masked your identity perfectly. We targeted their specific lending institution, capitalized on the bank's desperate need to offload toxic, distressed mortgages before the end of the fiscal quarter, and bought the paper for pennies on the dollar. I reached out and rested my fingertips against the rough paper of the envelope. Inside were the finalized, legally binding deeds and mortgage transfers. The bank approved the buyout, David said, his voice dropping to a low, definitive timbre. The paperwork cleared the county registry an hour ago. You own the debt, Kendra. I opened the flap and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. There it was, printed in black and white. My parents had secretly remortgaged their pristine, sprawling brick home, not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. They had leveraged every ounce of equity they possessed to fund a lifestyle they could not afford, drowning themselves in predatory interest rates just to keep up appearances for the church community and fund Jamal's lavish existence. They were 60 days away from complete and total foreclosure. The bank had been preparing to seize the property and throw them out onto the street. Instead, my holding company, Apex Holdings LLC, had swooped in and purchased the distressed debt entirely. I scanned the documents, my eyes tracing over my father's desperate, sprawling signature on the original loan agreements. He had called me a burden. He had told me I was useless. Yet here I was, holding the absolute legal rights to the roof over his head. I did not just hold their mortgage. I owned the walls. I owned the floors. I owned the newly renovated basement suite where Jamal and Brittany slept. I owned the second-floor bedroom where Brittany was currently swinging a sledgehammer to manifest her wellness sanctuary. It was the 31st of the month. Tomorrow was the 1st. Vivian was expecting her $1,500 rent check from her failure of a daughter to help cover the crushing debt she thought she was hiding from the world. Instead, she was about to receive a certified overnight letter from her new corporate landlord. I slide my fingers over the crisp edges of the heavy legal documents David has just dropped on my desk. The silence in the boardroom stretches as I read through the bold print. I spread the papers across the frosted glass, aligning them side by side, like pieces of a puzzle that finally reveal the ugly hidden truth behind my family's pristine facade. I look down at the ink and realize the sheer magnitude of their deception. My father, then, who loudly lectured me about being a provider and maintaining a legacy, had been running a financial house of cards for nearly half a decade. I traced the dates on the first mortgage document. It was signed exactly 5 years ago, right around the time Jamal decided he was going to be a cryptocurrency visionary. The figures printed on the page are absolutely staggering. Derek and Vivian had quietly gutted the equity of our childhood home to seed a massive digital portfolio for their golden child, a highly speculative portfolio that crashed to zero within 18 months. But they did not stop there. I pull up the second deed of trust and check the timestamp, 3 years ago. This date aligns perfectly with Jamal and Brittany's extravagant destination wedding in Cabo San Lucas and the subsequent $50,000 basement renovation they demanded so they could supposedly save for their own house. A house they never actually planned to buy. The third mortgage was taken out just 8 months ago, a predatory variable rate loan signed in sheer desperation to keep the whole illusion afloat. My parents were financing Brittany's leased luxury vehicles, Jamal's exclusive country club memberships, and my mother's designer wardrobe with borrowed time and toxic interest rates. They were funding a millionaire lifestyle on the back of a house they were rapidly losing to the bank. David stands across the table watching me process the absolute recklessness of the people who had called me a burden just 30 days prior. They were exactly 60 days away from complete and total ruin. The primary lender had already drawn up the foreclosure notices. In 2 short months, the county sheriff would have shown up at the front door to forcibly evict the mighty Washington family, stripping them of the very foundation of their suburban elite status. They had the audacity to slide a handwritten lease across a mahogany table and demand $1,500 a month from me, framing it as a tough lesson in adult responsibility, when in reality, they were drowning. They were desperately trying to use my rent money as a pathetic life raft to cover the interest payments on loans they took out to fund Jamal's pampered existence. I look at the transfer of ownership deed resting at the center of the table. Instead of letting the bank take the property and sell it at a public auction, I had instructed David to intervene directly. My holding company, Apex Holdings LLC, specializes in distressed debt acquisitions, among other financial maneuvers. We swooped in and bought the paper from the bank for pennies on the dollar. The original lender was thrilled to offload a toxic high-risk asset without going through the messy public and expensive foreclosure process. My parents had absolutely no idea their debt had been bundled and sold to a private corporate entity, and they certainly had no idea that the CEO of that entity was the daughter they had just tried to extort and throw out onto the street. I hold the physical proof of my absolute leverage in my hands. For 35 years, that house had been the ultimate weapon in my parents' arsenal. It was the roof they constantly held over my head, the threshold they threatened to throw my belongings across, the physical manifestation of their absolute control over my life. They used that house to demand submission, to force respect, to make me feel small and dependent. Now, legally and entirely, I own the paper to that house. I am the bank. I dictate the terms of their survival. I look up at David. He knows exactly what this moment means to me. I ask him if the new terms have been finalized. He confirms that the restructuring documents are drafted and ready for delivery. Because I own the debt, I have the legal right to call it in or restructure the payment terms based on the borrower's incredibly high-risk profile. I am not going to evict them today. That would be entirely too easy and far too swift. I am going to squeeze them exactly the way they tried to squeeze me, but with the full crushing weight of corporate law backing every single move. I sit down at my keyboard and draft the cover letter that will accompany the legal notice. I do not use my name. Everything is strictly branded under Apex Holdings LLC. The corporate language is cold, precise, and entirely unforgiving. I stipulate that due to their high-risk variable rate defaults and multiple missed deadlines. With the previous lender, the monthly minimum payment to maintain possession of the property has been immediately adjusted to reflect current market value and severe administrative penalties. The new monthly payment is not $1,500. It is an astronomical figure that will force Jamal and Brittany to actually open their wallets and contribute to the family they so loudly claim to protect. If the new terms are not met immediately, Apex Holdings LLC will initiate a rapid eviction process targeting all current residents of the property. I print the letter, sign it with my corporate proxy stamp, and hand it back to David. He places it in a sleek, heavy black envelope and seals it. It is the 31st of the month. I look out the window at the setting sun over the Atlanta skyline, knowing exactly what is happening in the Washington household right now. My mother is likely sitting at her mahogany dining table, her ledger open, eagerly waiting for the mail to arrive. She is fully expecting to find my desperate $1,500 check to save her from the brink of financial disaster. She expects a lesson in submission from a daughter she believes is broken and compliant. Instead, she is about to receive a certified overnight delivery from Apex Holdings LLC demanding rent on the very house she thought she owned. The evening air high above Atlanta was crisp, carrying the faint electric hum of the city below. I stood on the wrap-around balcony of my penthouse, leaning against the tempered glass railing. In my right hand I held a crystal glass of Cabernet. The deep red liquid caught the ambient light of the skyline. It was a beautiful evening to be entirely alone. My smartphone rested on the outdoor patio table, its screen dark and silent. It had been exactly 4 hours since David dispatched the certified overnight courier to my parents' address. I knew the exact route the delivery driver would take. I knew the exact time the doorbell would ring. I had calculated everything down to the minute. At precisely 6:14 in the evening, the phone screen illuminated the darkening balcony. The device vibrated violently against the glass tabletop. The caller ID flashed in bright white letters. Vivian Washington. I did not move. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the complex flavors settle on my tongue, and watched the screen go dark, after letting the call go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, the screen lit up again. Vivian Washington. I remained leaning against the railing. I watched the city traffic crawling along the interstate miles below. The phone went dark. Then it lit up again. And again. The aggressive rhythmic buzzing became the new soundtrack to my evening. By 6:30, she had called 8 times. Between the calls, text messages began firing onto the screen in rapid succession, a digital manifestation of her unraveling sanity. Where are you? Answer the phone, Kendra. This is an absolute emergency. Your father is having chest pains. Call me back right this second. I knew my father was not having chest pains. My father was likely pacing the length of their formal living room, his face purple with rage, screaming at a piece of heavy bond paper bearing the Apex Holdings LLC letterhead. He was a man who believed his loud voice could conquer any obstacle. He was currently learning that a loud voice cannot void a legally binding corporate restructuring document. At 6:34, the phone rang for the 14th time. I walked over to the patio table, picked up the device, and swiped the green icon to answer. I brought the phone to my ear, but I did not say a word. Kendra. Vivian shrieked. Her voice was an octave higher than her usual commanding tone, completely devoid of the haughty country club superiority she usually projected. Where have you been? I have been calling you for 20 minutes. I am resting, Mom. I replied, my voice steady and perfectly level. It has been a very productive week, resting. She gasped, the sheer panic in her voice, causing her to stumble over her words. You cannot be resting right now. We are in the middle of a massive crisis, a total catastrophe. Someone stole the house, Kendra. The bank sold us out to some absolute monster. I took another sip of wine. Stole the house, I repeated calmly. That sounds highly illegal. Are you sure you did not just default on your extremely leveraged variable rate mortgages? Do not use that tone with me. She snapped, her defensive instincts briefly overriding her panic. We had an arrangement with the bank. We were handling it. But they sold our paper without even giving us a warning. Some predatory soulless corporate entity called Apex Holdings swooped in and bought the debt. They had a courier serve us with papers right in the middle of dinner. Jamal nearly choked on his food. I walked slowly along the balcony, feeling the cool breeze against my face. It sounds like standard corporate procedure, Mom. What exactly did the papers say? What did they say? Vivian cried, her voice breaking into a genuine sob. They are demanding extortion. They are calling it a high-risk borrower restructuring fee. They want immediate payment to stop the eviction process. They are treating us like common criminals, Kendra. They mapped out the square footage of the house and applied commercial rental rates to our own property. I remained silent, letting her spiraling anxiety fill the airwaves. They want $3,000 a month just for the master suite. She sobbed, the numbers tumbling out of her mouth in absolute disbelief. They want another $2,000 for the renovated basement where Jamal and Brittany live. They even slapped a premium fee on your old bedroom because they categorized it as a wellness sanctuary. Brittany is completely hysterical. She is sitting on the floor in her yoga gear, refusing to speak. That sounds incredibly stressful, I said, keeping my tone perfectly detached. But I fail to see how this involves me. I moved out 30 days ago, remember? I dropped my house key on the bed right on top of the $1,500 lease agreement you drafted for me. You are our daughter, Vivian screamed, her entitlement roaring back to life. You do not just abandon your family when they are under attack. We put a roof over your head for 35 years. We fed you. We clothed you. We tolerated your little computer hobby while you contributed absolutely nothing to this household. You owe us, Kendra. You owe this family your absolute loyalty. I stopped walking. I looked out at the city, the empire I had conquered, while they were busy trying to keep me locked in a faded pink room. And how exactly do you expect me to show this loyalty, Mom? I need you to wire us your savings, she demanded, her voice dropping into a harsh, commanding register. I know you have been hoarding money from whatever freelance computer jobs you do. I know you never spend anything on clothes or vacations. You need to empty that account right now and wire it directly to your father. We have to pay this Apex Holdings monster by the first of the month, or the sheriff will literally throw us onto the lawn. Jamal is having a panic attack. Your father is calling his lawyers, but they are demanding retainers we do not have. You need to step up and fix this. She was breathing heavily into the receiver. She genuinely believed she was giving me an order. She genuinely believed that after decades of emotional abuse, after stealing my college fund, after parading my brother's manufactured success in my face, I would simply open my wallet and bleed myself dry to save their fragile suburban illusion. I brought the crystal glass to my lips. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the Cabernet. The silence on the line stretched for 5 agonizing seconds. Kendra, Vivian barked. Did you hear what I said? I need you to wire that money right now. I heard you, Mom, I said softly. The coldness in my voice seemed to echo off the glass windows of my penthouse. But you are missing a very crucial piece of information regarding your new landlord. What are you talking about? Vivian demanded. Her breath hitched. The aggression in her tone faltered, replaced by a sudden creeping confusion. What information? I leaned against the glass railing and smiled. I know they want $3,000 for the master suite, Mom, I said, enunciating every single word with lethal precision. I know they want $2,000 for the basement. I know the exact terms of the restructuring agreement. How could you possibly know that? Vivian whispered. The line was deathly quiet. I could hear the faint sound of my father yelling in the background of her house, but Vivian's breathing had stopped completely. Because I drafted the letter, I told her. My voice was a hammer striking a final nail. Apex Holdings LLC is my holding company. I own your debt. I own your walls. I own the basement where your precious son sleeps. You demanded I pay my fair share, so I bought the entire property. Kendra, you... Vivian started, her voice shaking so violently it was barely recognizable. Rent is due on the first, Mom, I said. I ended the call. I tapped the screen to power down the device, set it face down on the patio table, and turned my face toward the Atlanta skyline. The game was officially over. I had won. The morning sun flooded my penthouse, casting long, sharp shadows across the imported Italian marble floors. I stood at my kitchen island, sipping a freshly brewed espresso, entirely at peace. The notification from the bank had arrived at 7 in the morning, confirming that the overnight courier delivery was successful and the legal transition of the property deed to Apex Holdings LLC was fully executed. I was savoring the quiet victory when a heavy, violent pounding shattered the silence of my home. Someone was hammering their fists against my custom double oak front doors. The blows were frantic, completely out of place in a secure ultra-luxury high-rise where discretion was the ultimate amenity. I walked over to the smart home panel mounted on the wall and tapped the security feed. The high-definition camera revealed exactly what I expected, yet the sheer audacity of it still made my pulse steady into a cold, rhythmic beat. My father Derek stood front and center, his face flushed a dark, dangerous red. Behind him, Vivian clutched her designer purse like a shield. Jamal and Brittany hovered in the back, both looking frantic and unkempt. They had clearly tailgated a resident through the private garage entrance and slipped past the lobby concierge to reach the penthouse level. They thought they were launching a tactical strike. They thought they could corner me in my own sanctuary and force my hand. I did not panic. I simply unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open, stepping squarely into the doorframe to block their entry. The furious tirade my father had clearly rehearsed died instantly in his throat. For 10 agonizing seconds, the Washington family forgot to be angry. Instead, their eyes darted past my shoulder, utterly paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the wealth displayed behind me. My penthouse spanned 4,000 square feet of open-concept luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. A massive original contemporary art installation hung above a sleek sunken living area. Sunlight reflected off the glass-enclosed wine cellar and the custom floating staircase leading to my private rooftop deck. I watched Jamal's jaw physically drop. His eyes widened as he took in the bespoke Italian leather furniture and the undeniable proof of a lifestyle he spent every waking hour desperately pretending to have. He was wearing a counterfeit luxury watch and a suit bought on credit, standing in the hallway of a home that cost more than his entire projected lifetime earnings. The envy radiated off him in palpable, pathetic waves. My father recovered first. He physically shook his head, snapping himself out of the trance, and puffed out his chest, attempting to inflate his authority to match the scale of my home. "Enough of these pathetic games!" Kendra Derek barked, his voice booming down the quiet carpeted hallway. "You are going to stop this foolishness right now. I do not care what kind of trick you pulled with the bank or what fake company name you are using. You are going to march into whatever makeshift office you have in there, print out a quitclaim deed and sign that property directly over to your brother. You will do it out of respect for this family, and you will do it today." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Sign the house over to Jamal," I repeated, letting a cold smile touch my lips. "The same Jamal who burned through 3 different failed cryptocurrency startups, using equity illegally pulled from the house you are currently begging me for." Jamal flushed a deep, ugly crimson. "You have no idea what you are talking about," he snapped, stepping forward. "Those were highly sophisticated investments." "They were Ponzi schemes, Jamal," I corrected sharply. "And you funded them by letting mom and dad take out variable rate mortgages they could not afford. And now you want me to hand over an $8 million asset to a man who cannot even pass a basic executive competency exam without daddy pulling strings." Vivian shoved her way to the front, her eyes wild and desperate. "How dare you speak to your brother that way? We are a family. We protect each other. You have clearly hoarded away millions of dollars while letting us struggle. You owe us this house, Kendra. You have more than enough here." She waved her hand frantically at my penthouse. "You do not need our home. Give it to Jamal so he and Brittany can finally start their family in peace." I looked at Brittany. She was staring at my kitchen, her eyes calculating the cost of the imported marble countertops. She hated me, but she hated the fact that I was richer than her even more. "Your parents are facing a catastrophic bankruptcy," Brittany said, her voice dripping with that familiar artificial sweetness. "They are senior citizens, Kendra. Throwing them out on the street just to prove a point is incredibly toxic. We are willing to let you transfer the deed to Jamal quietly. We will not even ask you to cover the legal fees. It is the only way to cleanse this terrible energy you have brought into our lives." I laughed. It was a sharp, genuine sound that echoed down the corridor. "You are offering to waive the legal fees on a house I just paid cash for?" I asked, locking eyes with Brittany. "That is incredibly generous of you, but I think I will keep my property." Derek slammed his fist against the doorframe, stepping aggressively into my personal space. The scent of his stale coffee and anger washed over me. "You will not disrespect the patriarch of this family," he roared, the veins in his neck bulging. "I am your father. I demand you hand over those papers." "A woman does not dictate terms to her father or her brother. You are going to sign that house over, or I swear to God I will drag you through court until you have nothing left." "You do not have the capital to drag me anywhere, Dad," I stated, not flinching an inch. "You do not even have the capital to pay the $3,000 rent on your master bedroom. And as for signing the deed over to Jamal, I would rather burn the property to the ground." Vivian gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. "You are a monster. You are a cold, ungrateful monster. We gave you everything. You gave me a faded pink room and a lifetime of being told I was worthless." I corrected, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "You gave me cheap clothes and backhanded compliments while you bankrupted yourselves, trying to buy Jamal a crown he was never fit to wear. You handed me a lease agreement 30 days ago to establish your dominance. I am simply enforcing the rules you created." Derek lunged forward, trying to physically force his way past my shoulder and into the penthouse. I did not step back. Instead, I reached out and slammed my palm against the glowing red button on my smart home security panel, mounted just inside the doorframe. A sharp, piercing alarm instantly blared through the hallway, vibrating against the walls. "What did you just do?" Jamal yelled, covering his ears as the noise assaulted them. "I just summoned building security," I said calmly, my voice cutting cleanly through the deafening siren. "The private elevators are locking down, and 3 armed guards are currently on their way up here to remove a group of aggressive trespassers." I watched the color drain completely from Brittany's face. Her eyes darted from the flashing red lights on the panel to my unwavering expression. The smug corporate superiority she always wielded vanished in a single heartbeat. She looked at Jamal's panicked face, then at Derek's furious, impotent rage. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. The Washington family hierarchy was dead, and they were standing on the wrong side of the door. "You have exactly 60 seconds before you are escorted out in handcuffs," I told them. "Rent is due on the 1st. Do not be late." I stepped back, gripped the heavy oak doors, and slammed them shut directly in their faces. The reverberation of the heavy oak doors, slamming shut, vibrated through the floorboards of my entryway. I stood absolutely still in the foyer of my penthouse, listening to the muffled silence that instantly followed. The sheer finality of the physical barrier seemed to momentarily stun them. I turned back to the smart home security panel mounted on the wall and watched the high-definition live feed of the hallway. Derek was staring at the dark wood of my door, his fist still raised in the air, his face a portrait of complete and utter shock. He was a man who had spent his entire life commanding rooms, dictating terms, and forcing his reality onto everyone around him. Having a door slammed in his face was a profound rejection of his entire existence. Vivian was frozen behind him, her hand covering her mouth. Jamal looked entirely lost, his eyes darting around the luxurious, softly lit corridor of the high-rise, desperately trying to comprehend the shift in the universe. But Brittany was different. Through the crisp video feed, I watched the exact moment her strategic, calculating mind realized that brute force and parental intimidation had failed. Derek's blustering aggression had gotten them nowhere. They were locked out, they were losing, and the clock on their financial ruin was loudly ticking. She needed a new angle. She needed leverage. I watched her chest heave. She took a sudden, staggering step backward, pressing her spine against the silk wallpaper of the corridor. She threw one hand to her throat and began taking short, ragged, theatrical gasps of air. Jamal spun around instantly, abandoning his anger for panic. "Brittany, what is wrong?" he demanded, rushing to her side. She collapsed her weight against him, sliding dramatically down the wall until she was crouched on the carpet. She clutched her chest with both hands, hyperventilating with Oscar-worthy intensity. "I cannot breathe." She gasped, her voice unnaturally loud, designed specifically to carry down the quiet hallway and penetrate the heavy doors of the neighboring penthouses. "She is threatening us. Jamal, she is threatening me. I feel physically unsafe. Vivian dropped to her knees beside her daughter-in-law, feeding directly into the performance. Oh my God, Derek, she is having a panic attack, Vivian shrieked. Kendra has completely traumatized her. Brittany squeezed her eyes shut, letting a fresh cascade of tears spill over her carefully contoured cheeks. Her breathing grew more frantic, more exaggerated. She fumbled blindly into her designer purse, her hands shaking with practiced, weaponized fragility. She pulled out her smartphone, her fingers frantically tapping the screen. I am calling the police! Brittany sobbed loudly, ensuring her voice bounced off the corridor walls. We have a hostile individual. She locked us out and she is threatening our safety. I need officers here right now. It was a masterful, deeply insidious tactic. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was a well-dressed, tearful woman, sitting in the hallway of an ultra-luxury building, preparing to use the police as a personal customer service agency to force my hand. She was banking on the fact that I would be terrified of a public scene, terrified of the authorities showing up at my door, terrified of the scandal. She expected me to throw the doors open, apologize profusely, and beg her not to make the call. She expected me to surrender my leverage just to maintain the peace. She had severely miscalculated. I reached out and flipped the deadbolt. The heavy metallic click echoed clearly through the hallway. I pulled the oak door open just enough to step back onto the threshold. I did not look angry. I did not look panicked. I stood with perfectly straight posture, holding my absolute ground. Brittany's head snapped up at the sound of the door. She instantly dialed her performance up to a 10. Her tears flowed faster, her chest heaving as she held her phone up, preparing to dial those 3 digits and unleash chaos. She looked at me with a mixture of terror and triumphant defiance. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single word of apology. I simply raised my hand and pointed directly above my doorframe. Smile for the 4K audio-enabled camera, Brittany, I said. My voice was smooth, chilling, and completely detached. Brittany froze. Her thumb hovered over the screen of her phone. Her eyes tracked the line of my finger, landing squarely on the sleek black dome of the security camera, mounted discreetly in the ceiling architecture. The tiny red recording light blinked down at her. I tilted my head, studying her sudden paralysis. I know exactly how much your public relations firm values their corporate culture and their employee conduct policies. I continued my words, cutting cleanly through the dead silence of the hallway. Staging a fraudulent emergency, weaponizing the police, and orchestrating a fake panic attack to harass a building resident on ultra-high-definition video with crystal-clear audio is certainly a bold career choice. I am sure your human resources department would love to see exactly how you perform outside of the office. The transformation was absolute and immediate. The hyperventilating stopped entirely. The frantic gasping vanished. The heavy dramatic tears dried up in a single freezing second. Brittany lowered her phone, her hands suddenly perfectly steady. The mask of the traumatized victim dissolved, leaving only the cold, calculating expression of a woman who had just realized she was holding a losing hand in a very dangerous game. She stood up, brushing the invisible dust from her skirt, avoiding eye contact with the camera dome above my head. Jamal stared at his wife, completely bewildered by her miraculous, instantaneous recovery. "Brittany, are you okay?" he stammered. "Shut up, Jamal," she snapped, her voice devoid of any previous distress. Before Derek or Vivian could register the utter absurdity of what had just happened, a soft melodic chime echoed from the end of the hall. The polished steel doors of the private resident elevator slid open. 3 men stepped out into the corridor. They were not building concierges. They were private security dressed in immaculate tailored black suits, moving with the quiet, imposing authority of former military personnel. They fanned out instantly, forming a solid, impenetrable wall between my family and my front door. The lead security officer, a massive man with a stern, unyielding expression, turned his attention directly to Derek. "Sir, you and your party are trespassing in a secure residential zone. You need to vacate the premises immediately." Derek puffed up his chest, his face flushing with returning rage. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to?" Derek demanded, pointing a rigid finger at the guard. "I am her father. This is a private family matter. You work for her, but I am the patriarch of this family." The guard did not blink. He did not flinch. He simply stepped 1 inch closer to Derek, closing the distance and completely neutralizing my father's physical posturing. "You are an unauthorized trespasser," the guard stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You will step into the elevator voluntarily, or you will be physically removed and handed over to the local authorities. There is no third option." Derek's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The absolute reality of his powerlessness finally crushed his ego. He looked at me standing safely behind my wall of private security, untouched, unbothered, and completely in control. Vivian grabbed his arm, pulling him back, her face pale with humiliation as she realized they were about to be forcefully ejected like common criminals. The guard stepped forward, executing a flawless tactical maneuver that herded my parents, my brother, and his manipulative wife backward toward the open elevator doors. They had no choice. They shuffled into the steel cabin, stripped of their pride, stripped of their entitlement, and stripped of the home they thought they owned. Just before the guard reached to press the lobby button, I stepped out from my doorway. "Jamal," I called out. My brother looked up. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of terror and defeat. He looked like a little boy who had finally broken his favorite toy and had no idea how to fix it. I walked slowly toward the elevator, stopping just outside the threshold. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a sleek, heavy black envelope. The Apex Holdings LLC logo was embossed in silver on the front. I held the envelope out into the open elevator. Jamal stared at it for a second, before his hands reflexively reached out to take it. He grasped the heavy cardstock, his fingers trembling slightly. "Here is your mail," I said, maintaining absolute eye contact with him. "You have 14 days to vacate the basement." I stepped back. The guard pressed the button. The polished steel doors slid shut, sealing my family inside and plunging them into the long, rapid descent back down to reality. The heavy steel doors of the elevator had barely closed before Jamal's bruised ego demanded immediate retaliation. He was not a man who knew how to lose gracefully. For his entire life, whenever he encountered an obstacle, my parents had simply paved over it with their own money and my self-esteem. Now, facing a 14-day eviction notice from his own sister, he retreated to the only weapon he understood: deception and sabotage. Down in the renovated basement that he was about to lose, Jamal opened his laptop. If he could not bully me in person, he decided he would destroy the corporate empire I had built. He spent the next 48 hours engaged in a frantic, obsessive smear campaign. He created dozens of fake online profiles. He flooded business directories and industry review sites with horrific fabricated testimonials about Apex Holdings LLC. He claimed my company was a predatory scam, a front for illegal financial operations, and a fundamentally toxic environment. But he did not stop at anonymous internet reviews. His arrogance pushed him directly into criminal territory. Using a proxy email address, Jamal managed to scrape the contact information from my primary venture capital investors and board members. He drafted a deeply unhinged multi-paragraph email and hit send to everyone on the list. The subject line read, "Urgent disclosure regarding Kendra Washington." In the email, Jamal claimed to be a concerned family member, acting out of moral obligation. He wrote that I was currently under severe psychiatric care for a complete mental breakdown. He detailed a completely fabricated narrative, stating that my initial seed money was stolen directly from my elderly parents and their fragile retirement accounts. He claimed I was currently embezzling corporate funds to maintain a lavish, manic lifestyle while leaving my family destitute and living in squalor. He urged them to pull their funding immediately before the federal authorities intervened and seized their investments. It was a spectacular display of defamation. It was also incredibly stupid. I was sitting at the head of my mahogany conference table, reviewing quarterly projections when David walked into the room. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. He did not say a word. He simply placed a printed copy of Jamal's email on the glass surface in front of me, followed by a thick dossier of printouts showing the fake reviews. I read through the documents in complete silence. The words were venomous, dripping with the exact brand of entitlement and victimhood my brother had perfected over 30 years. He genuinely believed that because we shared a bloodline, he was immune to consequence. He thought I would panic, call my mother in tears, and beg for a truce to save my reputation. David stood by my chair, his posture rigid. "We have fielded 4 calls from concerned investors this morning," he stated, his voice perfectly level. "They are asking for clarification regarding your legal authority over the company assets and inquiring about your health. Our public relations team is already drafting a holding statement, but the damage to our corporate reputation is actively compounding. Should I attempt to contact your father to rein him in?" I looked up from the papers. I felt no anger. I felt no betrayal. You cannot betray a bond that never existed in the first place. I only felt a cold, surgical clarity. "No," I replied, sliding the papers back toward him. "We do not negotiate with people who throw tantrums, David. We litigate them. Get the legal team on the line immediately." Within 15 minutes, my lead corporate counsel, a terrifyingly efficient woman named Sarah, was on a secure video conference. I did not raise my voice. I did not express an ounce of familial sorrow. I laid out the facts and gave her complete authorization to execute the absolute maximum legal response available under the law. Sarah and her team moved with the precision of a military strike. They did not waste time calling Jamal to argue or demand an apology. They immediately pulled the metadata from the emails and tracked the IP addresses from the fake reviews. Jamal had tried to use a basic virtual private network, but his technical skills were as fraudulent as his previous business ventures. The digital footprints led directly back to the router in my parents' basement. By the end of the business day, my legal team had drafted a devastating counterstrike. They filed an emergency cease and desist order alongside a massive multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit naming Jamal personally. The charges included libel, tortious interference with prospective business relations, and corporate sabotage. But Sarah did not stop there. Knowing Jamal's history of financial recklessness, specifically the failed investment schemes that had drained my parents' equity in the first place, she filed an ex parte motion for a prejudgment writ of attachment. She argued to the judge that Jamal was a flight risk who would likely attempt to hide or liquidate his remaining assets to avoid paying damages once he realized the scope of the lawsuit. The judge, presented with the overwhelming digital evidence and Jamal's documented history of financial instability, signed the order immediately. The court issued an emergency freeze on every single bank account, credit line, and financial asset attached to Jamal's social security number. The war had officially moved from the dining room to the courtroom, and Jamal had brought a plastic knife to a nuclear launch. The following morning dawned bright and clear. Jamal, completely oblivious to the legal avalanche rapidly descending upon him, was maintaining his illusion of wealthy suburban comfort. He drove his leased luxury SUV to an artisanal coffee shop in the upscale retail district, a place where the baristas knew him by name, and he could pretend to be a busy, important executive starting his day. He stood at the marble counter wearing a perfectly tailored suit and ordered his usual $7 iced oat milk latte. He chatted confidently with the barista, projecting the aura of a man who had successfully put his difficult sister in her place. He pulled his premium metal credit card from his designer wallet and tapped it against the payment terminal. The machine beeped a harsh, dissonant tone. The screen flashed bright red. Declined. Jamal frowned, an irritated sigh escaping his lips. He muttered something about a chip error and pulled out a different card, a high-limit bank card tied directly to his checking account. He inserted it into the reader. The machine processed for 3 seconds before beeping again. Declined. Please contact your financial institution. The barista offered a polite, strained smile, holding the frosted cup just out of reach. Would you like to try another form of payment, sir? Jamal felt the eyes of the line forming behind him burning into his back. A hot flush of embarrassment crept up his neck and settled into his cheeks. He stepped aside, pulling his smartphone from his pocket with shaking hands. He opened his banking application, fully intending to transfer funds and yell at a customer service representative for the inconvenience. Instead of his account balances, the screen displayed a stark, unyielding alert. Access denied. Account frozen pending legal action. Please contact branch manager. Jamal stared at the screen, the reality of his situation crashing down on him in real time. He had no money. He had an eviction notice waiting on his nightstand. He had just declared war on a corporate entity that could crush him without breaking a single sweat. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face as he realized exactly what he had done. He had forced my hand and I had taken absolutely everything. The weekend arrived with the quiet, triumphant hum of total victory. My legal team had executed the asset freeze on Jamal, with surgical perfection, leaving him financially paralyzed and entirely silenced. The frantic, threatening phone calls from my immediate family had abruptly ceased, replaced by the stark realization that they were outmatched in a game they had foolishly initiated. I spent my Sunday morning in the sunlit expanse of my penthouse, reviewing the preliminary discovery files Sarah had compiled for the defamation suit. The apartment was completely silent, save for the soft jazz playing through the hidden ceiling speakers. I poured myself a fresh cup of Earl Grey tea, feeling a deep, profound sense of peace. That peace shattered exactly at 11:30 in the morning. My smartphone resting beside my laptop on the kitchen island lit up with a notification. Then another. Then 5 more in rapid succession. The device began to vibrate continuously, a sustained angry buzz against the cool marble countertop. I glanced at the screen, expecting to see a desperate, groveling message from Jamal or a hollow apology from Derek. Instead, the names flashing across the locked screen belonged to an entirely different tier of my life. These were not the people involved in the immediate financial war. These were the spectators: Cousin Marcus, Aunt Valerie, Deacon Hayes from the church my family had attended since I was in middle school, family friends who had known me since I was a child wearing stiff Sunday dresses. I picked up the phone and unlocked it. A torrent of vitriol poured into my inbox, a coordinated digital assault that was breathtaking in its sheer venom. "You are a complete and total disgrace to this family," read a text from Marcus. "I cannot believe you would do something so evil to your own mother. I hope that money keeps you warm at night, because you are dead to this community." A message from a woman who used to babysit me stated, "Throwing your elderly parents out on the street, you are a monster, Kendra." The messages kept coming, scrolling past my eyes faster than I could read them. They called me corrupted by greed. They called me a soulless corporate demon. They accused me of hoarding millions, while my hardworking parents faced homelessness. The sheer volume of the hatred was staggering, a tidal wave of coordinated community assassination. I did not panic. I simply sat down on one of the leather bar stools, tapped the screen, and opened a voice message left by Aunt Valerie. Valerie had always been the biggest gossip in our extended social circle. If you wanted to know how a rumor started, you simply let Valerie speak for 2 minutes. I pressed play and held the phone to my ear. "Kendra Washington," Valerie's voice rang out, trembling with righteous theatrical fury. "I have just left the Sunday service at First Fellowship, and I have never been so heartbroken in my entire life. To see your mother, a woman who sacrificed everything for you, weeping in the sanctuary. To hear what you have done. It is an abomination." I listened carefully, piecing together the exact sequence of events from Valerie's breathless outrage. With their bank accounts frozen and the eviction clock ticking down to zero, Vivian had realized she could not win a legal war or a financial war. So she retreated to the one battlefield where she held absolute supremacy, the court of public opinion. Vivian had gone to church. She had dressed in her most conservative, understated Sunday suit. She had taken her seat in the third row, flanked by Derek, who was undoubtedly instructed to look stoic and broken, and Jamal playing the role of the stressed, protective son. And when the service ended, when the congregation gathered for fellowship in the grand hall, Vivian had unleashed a masterclass in manipulation. Through Valerie's angry rambling, I could visualize the performance perfectly. Vivian breaking down in tears near the refreshment table. The prominent church elders rushing to her side. Vivian pulling a lace handkerchief from her purse, her voice trembling as she spun a tale of devastating betrayal. She did not mention her reckless borrowing. She did not mention Jamal's fraudulent cryptocurrency schemes that had drained their equity. She certainly did not mention the $1,500 lease they had tried to force me to sign just 30 days prior. Instead, Vivian painted a picture of a greedy, ruthless daughter who had used a legal loophole to steal the family home from under them. She told the congregation that I was a secret millionaire who hid my wealth only to suddenly emerge as a predatory corporate landlord demanding thousands of dollars in extortion money. She claimed I was actively throwing my elderly parents and my innocent brother onto the street out of pure, unexplained malice. She weaponized the deepest values of our predominantly African American community against me: respect for elders, family loyalty, the sacred bond between a mother and a daughter. Vivian took those pillars of our culture and used them to publicly crucify me. She played the weeping, betrayed matriarch so flawlessly that an entire network of people who had watched me grow up turned into a mob with a single coordinated narrative. I was the villain, and they were the innocent victims of my corporate greed. I deleted Valerie's voicemail. I set the phone down on the counter. Despite the thick armor I had built around myself, the coordinated attack stung. It was one thing to fight my parents in a boardroom or a courtroom. It was another to watch my entire social history be erased and rewritten by my mother's flawless victim routine. The people texting me with such hatred were the same people who had celebrated my high school graduation, the same people who had shared meals with me at summer cookouts. Vivian had not just burned the bridge between us, she had salted the earth of my entire past. She wanted me to feel isolated. She wanted me to feel the crushing weight of public shame. She wanted me to break under the pressure of community exile, pick up the phone, and surrender the deed to the house just to stop the bleeding. I stood up from the stool. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city below. Let them talk, I thought to myself. The deed is still in my name, and the eviction notice is still active. Then the phone rang again. It was not a text message. It was an incoming call. The name on the caller ID did not belong to a gossiping cousin or an easily manipulated church friend. The screen read, Aunt Patrice. I stared at the name, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Aunt Patrice was Vivian's older sister. She was the undisputed no-nonsense matriarch of the extended Washington family. She was a woman who had built a massive catering empire from a single food truck, put 5 children through college as a single mother, and commanded absolute unwavering respect from everyone in her orbit. Patrice did not gossip. Patrice did not engage in theatrics. If Vivian was the performer of the family, Patrice was the judge, jury, and executioner. When Aunt Patrice spoke, the entire family listened. I picked up the phone. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation, and answered the call. Hello, Aunt Patrice, I said, keeping my voice steady and respectful. Kendra, her voice came through the speaker. It was not loud. It was not trembling with the manufactured rage that had colored the other messages. It was chillingly calm, carrying the heavy gravitational pull of absolute authority. I did not offer an explanation. I knew better than to preemptively defend myself to Patrice. Yes, ma'am. I am not going to ask you to explain yourself over the telephone, Patrice said, her words measured and deliberate. But you and I are going to have a conversation. I waited the silence on the line, feeling heavier than the roaring of a dozen angry relatives. Meet me for coffee, Patrice said. We need to talk about what you are doing to your mother. The heavy glass door of the Heritage Roasters Cafe swung shut behind me, sealing out the damp chill of the morning air. I spotted Aunt Patrice immediately. She was seated in a high-backed leather booth in the far corner, positioned perfectly to observe the entire room. She wore a tailored navy blue suit, a string of immaculate pearls resting against her collarbone, and an expression that could curdle fresh milk. Aunt Patrice did not command respect through shouting. She commanded it through absolute terrifying stillness. I walked across the polished hardwood floor, my heels clicking in a steady, measured rhythm. I slid into the booth opposite her. She did not offer a hug. She did not ask how my morning was going. She simply stared at me, her dark eyes analyzing every inch of my demeanor. She was looking for guilt. She was looking for the cracks in my armor that Vivian had so vividly described to the congregation. You have lost your way, Kendra Patrice stated. Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the ambient noise of the cafe with surgical precision. I ordered a green tea from the waiter, who nervously approached our table, waiting until he retreated before I returned her gaze. I kept my hands folded neatly on the table. Your mother sat in the sanctuary yesterday and wept until she could barely breathe. Patrice continued, leaning forward slightly. She told the entire congregation that her own daughter, the child she carried and raised, is throwing her out onto the street. She told us that you have hoarded millions in secret, while allowing your family to face financial ruin. The community is devastated, Kendra. The elders are praying for your soul. You are parading your greed in front of God, and everyone dragging our family name through the mud over bricks and mortar. I let her speak. I did not interrupt, defend myself, or react to the sharp sting of her accusations. I understood the mechanics of power. If I argued, I was a defensive child. If I listened, I remained in control. This modern corporate ruthlessness you have adopted might work in boardrooms, Patrice said, her tone growing colder, but it does not apply to blood. You do not evict the woman who gave you life. You do not freeze your brother's bank accounts and treat him like a common criminal. A house is just a piece of property, Kendra. Money comes and goes. But a mother is forever. You are breaking the fundamental laws of family and respect. I am telling you right now, as the matriarch of this family, you will drop this ridiculous lawsuit against Jamal. You will sign the deed of that house back over to your parents, and you will ask for their forgiveness. She folded her hands, signaling that the sermon was over. The verdict had been delivered. She expected me to lower my head, absorb the guilt, and yield to the weight of generational authority. My tea arrived. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the warmth settle in my chest. I respect you, Aunt Patrice, I said quietly. My voice was entirely devoid of malice or sarcasm. You built a catering empire from nothing. You raised 5 children single-handedly. You are the pillar of this family. Because I respect you, I am not going to argue with you. I am not going to defend my character against Vivian's theatrical performance. I am simply going to show you the truth. I reached down into my structured leather tote bag, resting on the seat beside me. I pulled out a thick, heavy leather-bound ledger. It was a physical, tangible record my forensic accountants had painstakingly compiled over the last 72 hours. I placed it squarely in the center of the table and slid it across the smooth wood until it rested against Patrice's coffee cup. What is this? Patrice asked, eyeing the book as if it were a venomous snake. This is the reality Vivian forgot to mention during her altar call yesterday, I replied. Open it. Patrice hesitated. Her jaw tightened, but her unwavering demand for order and truth forced her hand. She flipped the heavy leather cover open. Look at page 4, Auntie, I said softly. Patrice turned the thick premium pages. Her eyes scanned the top sheet. It was a certified bank abstract complete with official seals and routing numbers. I watched the exact moment her brain processed the figures. The stern, judgmental rigidity in her face gave way to a sudden sharp confusion. I am sure Vivian told you that Derek made some bad investments. I continued, keeping my tone strictly informational. I am sure she claimed they just fell on hard times. But Vivian and Derek did not just lose their own money, Aunt Patrice. They lost yours. Patrice's head snapped up, her eyes wide. What are you talking about? Look at the routing trail on page 4, I instructed. 3 years ago, Vivian and Derek forged the necessary consent signatures to gain unilateral control over the ancestral family estate in Georgia. The land that grandfather left as a communal trust for all the cousins. The land that was supposed to fund your grandchildren's college tuitions. Patrice's breathing hitched. She looked back down at the ledger, her finger tracing the highlighted financial transfers. They took out a massive predatory remortgage on the communal estate. I stated, laying out the facts with brutal efficiency. They liquidated the generational wealth of this entire family. And they did not do it to pay medical bills or keep a roof over their heads. Turn to page 7. She turned the page. The silence in the cafe seemed to amplify as the reality of the betrayal set in. They bled the family trust dry to fund Jamal, I said. You are looking at the direct transfer logs. $200,000 poured into Jamal's fraudulent cryptocurrency accounts. $80,000 wired to a luxury dealership to secure the lease on Brittany's G-Wagon. $50,000 for their extravagant anniversary trip to Dubai. Your sister and my father robbed this family blind so their golden child could play pretend on the internet. And when the money ran out, when the lenders came calling to foreclose on everything, they tried to extort me to cover the tracks. Patrice sat absolutely paralyzed. The color drained completely from her face. She was a woman who valued loyalty above all else. Finding out her own sister had stolen from her grandchildren, to fund a lavish fake lifestyle for an arrogant nephew was a violation beyond comprehension. They were going to let the bank seize the Georgia estate without telling you, I continued quietly. The only reason I bought their primary residence and initiated the eviction was to secure a physical asset to leverage against the stolen trust funds. I froze Jamal's accounts because he is actively trying to hide the remaining stolen money. Vivian did not go to church yesterday because she is a victim, Aunt Patrice. She went to church to weaponize the congregation against me before I could show you this ledger. I leaned back in my booth, giving her the space to absorb the magnitude of the deception. I did not push, I did not gloat. The numbers on the page did all the heavy lifting. Aunt Patrice stared at the banking logs for a long, agonizing minute. Her shoulders, usually held in a posture of unyielding defiance, lowered slightly. Her hands, resting on the open pages, trembled with a rage so profound it was entirely silent. The narrative Vivian had spun, the weeping mother routine, the community outrage, it all disintegrated into ash. Very slowly, Patrice closed the leather-bound ledger. The heavy thud of the cover sounded like a gavel striking wood. She placed her hands flat on top of the book. When she finally looked up at me, the judgment in her eyes was no longer directed at my corporate ruthlessness. It was directed entirely at the sister who had betrayed their bloodline. Patrice did not yell, she did not cry. She adjusted the pearl necklace at her throat, her face settling into a mask of pure calculated wrath. What time are you coming to church on Sunday? The stained glass windows of First Fellowship cast long multicolored shadows across the polished oak pews. The sanctuary was packed to capacity, the air humming with the low electric murmur of a congregation fueled by fresh scandal. In the front row, holding court, exactly where she always did, sat my mother. Vivian was a vision in a muted charcoal suit, her posture slightly slumped to convey the perfect amount of maternal devastation. Every few minutes, she would press a pristine lace handkerchief to the corners of her eyes, accepting the quiet pats and sympathetic nods from the deacons' wives surrounding her. Derek sat rigidly beside her, his jaw clenched, playing the role of the stoic patriarch, enduring a terrible family tragedy. Up at the pulpit, Pastor Davis adjusted his microphone. He was a charismatic man who knew exactly how to read a room, and today the room demanded a sermon on betrayal. He cleared his throat, letting a heavy, somber silence fall over the congregation. Brothers and sisters, Pastor Davis began, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. Today my heart is heavy. We are gathering to pray for families torn apart by greed. We must pray for those who have let the love of money poison their souls, turning them against the very parents who gave them life. We must pray for a return to family loyalty. A collective sympathetic hum rose from the pews. Vivian lowered her head, letting a single tragic sob escape her lips. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was cementing her victimhood in front of the entire community, ensuring that my name would be permanently associated with corporate cruelty and elder abuse. At that exact moment, the heavy double doors at the back of the sanctuary swung open. The brass hinges groaned, a sound so loud and sudden that it cut straight through the pastor's opening prayer. Hundreds of heads turned simultaneously. People shifted in their seats, straining to see who would dare interrupt the Sunday service. I stood in the center aisle. I did not wear the muted colors of mourning or shame. I wore a tailored emerald green sheath dress, my posture perfectly straight, my expression entirely unreadable. I was not there to ask for forgiveness. I was not there to beg for my reputation back. I was there to execute a controlled demolition of the lies my mother had built her entire life upon. But the real shockwave moving through the congregation was not my presence. It was the woman standing firmly by my right side. Aunt Patrice stood tall in a royal purple suit, her matching hat tilted at a sharp, unyielding angle. Her face was set in stone. In our community, Patrice walking into a room alongside you was the ultimate endorsement. She was the bedrock of this church and this family. Patrice escorting the supposedly disgraced daughter into the very sanctuary where she had just been crucified was a tectonic shift in the social hierarchy. A collective gasp rippled through the pews. The whispering stopped instantly, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. I kept my eyes locked on the pulpit as Patrice and I began our slow, measured walk down the long center aisle. The crisp click of our heels against the hardwood floor sounded like a countdown clock ticking toward zero. In the front row, Vivian's performance completely shattered. The lace handkerchief dropped to her lap, forgotten. The color drained from her carefully powdered face, leaving an ashen, terrified pallor behind. She saw me, and her eyes widened in pure panic. Then she saw her older sister walking beside me, radiating pure unfiltered wrath, and pure survival instinct took over. Vivian scrambled out of the pew. She rushed into the aisle, stepping directly into our path to intercept us, before we could reach the altar. Her polite, devastated mother routine vanished instantly, replaced by frantic, vicious desperation. She knew exactly what kind of financial ruin she was hiding, and she knew Patrice would never tolerate a thief in the family. "What are you doing here?" Vivian hissed, her voice dropping to a toxic, frantic whisper meant only for us. "You have no right to show your face in this church, Kendra. Get out. Get out right now before you embarrass yourself further." "Patrice, what are you doing with her? She is a liar. She is trying to ruin us. You cannot believe a word she says." I did not say a word. I simply looked at my mother, watching the absolute terror vibrating in her eyes. I felt no pity. I felt absolutely nothing. Aunt Patrice did not break her stride. She did not yell. She simply raised one gloved hand and physically brushed Vivian aside with a firm, dismissive sweep of her arm. It was a motion reserved for swatting away a pesky insect. "Move out of my way," Vivian Patrice said, her voice dropping to a frigid, dangerous register that demanded immediate compliance. "Your performance is over." Vivian stumbled backward, colliding hard with the edge of the wooden pew. Derek jumped up to catch her, his face dark with anger, but even he lacked the courage to directly challenge Patrice in the middle of Sunday service. They were paralyzed, trapped in the crosshairs of their own manufactured spectacle, unable to stop what was coming next. Patrice and I bypassed my parents completely and walked directly up the carpeted steps to the pulpit. Pastor Davis took a hesitant step back, his hands hovering nervously over his open Bible. He had been prepared to deliver a sermon on my alleged sins. He was entirely unprepared for a hostile takeover of his service by the most respected elder in his congregation. Patrice reached into her oversized leather handbag and pulled out a thick manila folder. It was not the same ledger I had shown her at the cafe. It was something much more specific. Something Patrice had spent the last 48 hours quietly pulling together, using her own extensive connections within the church administration and her own forensic accountants. She placed the folder directly on top of the pastor's open Bible, planting her hand firmly over the cover. "Before you lead this congregation in prayer regarding greed, Pastor Davis," Patrice said, her voice carrying clearly through the lapel microphone clipped to his robe, "I suggest you review the financial records of your own building fund." Pastor Davis frowned, looking down at the folder. A murmur ran through the first few rows of the congregation who had heard the exchange. He slowly opened the cover. The documents inside were undeniable. They were detailed bank transfer logs, internal church accounting records, and forged authorization slips. Vivian had served as the church treasurer for the past 6 years. It was a position of high trust, a role she used to cement her status as a pillar of the community while looking down on everyone else. It was also a role she had completely and systematically exploited. The records showed that over the past 18 months, Vivian had silently siphoned over $40,000 from the church's new community center building fund. She had routed the money through a series of shell accounts directly into Jamal's failed businesses to cover his mounting debts. When the ancestral family estate equity was not enough to satisfy Jamal's luxurious lifestyle and Brittany's demands for designer goods, Vivian had turned to stealing directly from her own congregation. She had robbed the community to keep her golden child driving a luxury car. I stood silently beside my aunt, watching the blood leave Pastor Davis's face. His eyes darted back and forth across the highlighted columns of stolen church funds. The spiritual leader of our community, a man who had just been preparing to condemn me to social exile based on Vivian's tears, was currently reading the absolute irrefutable proof of his own treasurer's staggering felony. He slowly closed the manila folder. His hands were visibly shaking against the wooden podium. He looked up, his gaze bypassing Patrice and me entirely. He looked out over the pulpit, his eyes landing squarely on Vivian, who was trembling violently in the front pew, clutching Derek's arm for a support that was rapidly evaporating. The entire congregation fell into a deathly silence as the pastor leaned into the microphone. Sister Vivian, we need to have a meeting in my office. Immediately. 3 months had passed since the heavy sanctuary doors swung shut on Vivian's reign as the untouchable matriarch of our extended family. The fallout from the church incident had been absolute, a quiet, brutal severing of the family's inner circle. Aunt Patrice had taken the ledger I provided and ruthlessly purged my parents from the church board, freezing them out of the social elite they so desperately craved. The legal machinery I had set in motion was currently grinding Jamal's life into fine dust. Discovery was proving to be a nightmare for him. Yet human denial is a remarkably powerful narcotic, and my family was currently overdosing on it. That delusion was on full spectacular display under the gaudy imitation crystal chandeliers of the Oak Ridge Banquet Hall. It was the traditional venue for the annual Washington family reunion, a sprawling event that drew over 100 cousins, aunts, uncles, and distant relatives from across 3 states. The air was thick with the scent of catered baked chicken, warm dinner rolls, and the heavy floral perfumes of the older generation. I arrived precisely an hour after the event began. I wore a tailored slate gray sheath dress, my posture perfectly straight, my demeanor entirely unbothered. I did not sneak in through a side door or hover near the exit. I walked directly into the center of the room, greeted the relatives who had genuinely supported me, and took my place near the far wall to observe the circus. The architects of their own destruction had arrived before me. Vivian, Derek, Jamal, and Brittany were currently working the room with a manic, desperate energy. They had chosen to take the nuclear route of pretending absolutely nothing was wrong. They were projecting a bizarre, aggressive aura of extreme wealth and untouchable success, leaning heavily into an illusion to save face among the wider extended family who had only heard fragmented rumors of the lawsuits. Vivian wore a pristine white pantsuit, her chin tilted at a defiant angle. She was holding court near the dessert table, laughing a little too loudly and projecting the aura of a woman who was bravely soldiering on despite the jealousy of others. Derek walked beside her, his shoulders squared, forcing hearty handshakes on uncles who looked entirely uncomfortable making eye contact with him. They all knew about the stolen generational wealth thanks to Aunt Patrice, but polite Southern manners kept the confrontation entirely unspoken. But it was Jamal and Brittany who truly anchored the masquerade. Jamal was poured into a custom-tailored navy suit that screamed new money. He strutted across the patterned carpet of the banquet hall like a conquering emperor. Brittany clung tightly to his arm, her makeup flawless, her smile razor-sharp. She continuously positioned her wrist to catch the light, ensuring everyone in her immediate radius was blinded by a thick, glittering diamond tennis bracelet. I stood near the beverage station holding a glass of sparkling water with a twist of lime, watching the performance with absolute surgical detachment. Aunt Patrice materialized beside me, holding a cup of black coffee. She wore a deep burgundy dress, her eyes tracking Vivian from across the room. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. We did not need to. We both knew that my forensic accountants had finished their primary sweep of Jamal's frozen assets 2 weeks ago. We knew the exact terrifying depth of the financial crater Jamal and my parents had dug for themselves. That bracelet is cubic zirconia, Patrice stated quietly, taking a slow sip of her coffee. I can spot a cheap machine-cut facet from 20 feet away. She is parading around like a billionaire while your father is begging the bank for an extension on a second mortgage. I took a sip of my water. I knew for an absolute verifiable fact that Brittany's luxury SUV had been unceremoniously repossessed from a grocery store parking lot exactly 5 days ago. The suit Jamal was wearing had likely been purchased on a high-interest credit card opened under a fabricated corporate entity. Their reality was entirely hollow, a cardboard movie set teetering on the edge of a Category 5 hurricane. I shifted my gaze to watch Jamal drift toward a cluster of my younger impressionable cousins near the high-top tables. His voice was intentionally projected, designed to carry over the ambient noise of the hall and reach as many ears as possible. It is a massive transitional phase for my firm. Jamal bragged, swirling a glass of amber liquid and puffing out his chest. This new corporate merger I am spearheading right now is going to completely redefine the tech sector. We are talking 9 figures minimum. The regulatory paperwork alone is a nightmare, but when you are at the absolute top of the food chain, you carry the weight. My board of directors trusts my vision entirely. Brittany chimed in, tossing her hair over her shoulder and sighing dramatically. Jamal has been working so incredibly hard, she cooed, flashing her wrist directly in the face of my cousin Maya. He surprised me with this tennis bracelet just yesterday to apologize for all the late nights at the office. He spoils me terribly, but that is just the kind of provider he is. Maya smiled politely, though her eyes darted nervously toward me across the room. I remained perfectly still. Jamal was publicly stealing the exact terminology of my daily life, adopting the vocabulary of corporate mergers and board of directors to build an armor of lies. He was deeply, profoundly terrified, and his fear manifested as pure, unadulterated arrogance. The dinner bell chimed, a soft electronic tone, echoing through the hall, signaling the opening of the main buffet. I placed my water glass on a passing waiter's tray and made my way toward the long tables draped in white linen. I had just picked up a heavy ceramic plate when the sharp scent of designer cologne assaulted my senses. Jamal materialized immediately to my left, blocking my path to the carving station. Brittany flanked my right, her posture rigid, her fake smile plastered firmly in place. They had trapped me in the absolute most visible area of the banquet hall, directly in front of the carving station line. I looked past Jamal's shoulder and noticed several aunts, uncles, and cousins subtly pausing their conversations. The ambient chatter in our immediate radius dropped to a dead silence. Dozens of eyes darted toward our standoff. Jamal wanted an audience. He craved a public stage to reclaim the power he had so spectacularly lost in the hallway of my penthouse 3 months ago. "Enjoy the catered roast beef," Kendra, Jamal said. He did not whisper. He pitched his voice to ensure the first 3 tables could hear every single syllable of his performance. "It might be the very last decent meal you have for a very long time." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I held my empty plate perfectly still, allowing the heavy silence of the room to amplify his foolishness. "Is that right?" I asked, my voice entirely flat, stripped of any recognizable emotion. "Do not play coy with me," Jamal sneered, stepping half an inch closer, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me. "We all know what is really going on behind closed doors. You thought you could pull a fast one with those ridiculous, desperate lawsuits. You thought you could scare me. But my corporate lawyers have already filed the countersuit. They are completely tearing your little operation apart in the discovery phase." He turned slightly, ensuring the cousins at the nearest table were hanging on his every word. In fact, Jamal continued, his voice ringing with absolute fabricated authority. "My legal team was the one who alerted the federal investigators. It is only a matter of days before the authorities raid your little tech company. Everyone in the industry knows you are cooking the books, Kendra. You are under massive federal investigation for corporate fraud and embezzlement." Brittany nodded vigorously, playing the role of the supportive, concerned wife to the absolute hilt. "It is really sad, honestly," Brittany announced to the silent buffet line, feigning a look of deep pity. "To see you spiral like this, Kendra. We know about the psychiatric hold. Jamal's countersuit is going for absolute maximum damages to protect our family from your toxic behavior. By the time our legal team is finished dismantling your fraudulent company, you are going to be completely penniless. You will be lucky if you are not sleeping in a cardboard box by Christmas." "You are going to be completely penniless," Brittany echoed, amplifying her husband's fabricated reality. She stepped out from behind Jamal, moving into the open space between the buffet line and the round tables covered in heavy white damask. She wanted the spotlight, and she knew exactly how to capture it. Brittany clutched her faux diamond tennis bracelet with one hand and pressed the other to her chest. Her voice jumped an octave, carrying the trembling, fragile tone of a woman pushed to her absolute limit. "Why are you even here, Kendra?" "Kendra," Brittany cried out. Her voice pierced the low hum of the banquet hall, forcing every conversation in the room to an immediate halt. "Haven't you hurt this family enough?" She spun around, making sure the aunts, uncles, and older cousins seated at the premium tables had a clear view of her manufactured distress. She locked eyes with Aunt Valerie, the family's most notorious gossip, ensuring her performance was hitting its exact target. "We came here today to celebrate our heritage," Brittany announced to the silent room, her voice shaking with fake emotion. "We came here to be together. And you just cannot stand it, can you? You cannot stand that Jamal is actually trying to protect our legacy while you try to tear it apart. You are just so incredibly jealous of his success." I watched her perform. It was a fascinating display of sheer unadulterated delusion. Brittany was banking heavily on the old family dynamic, the one where I was the quiet, difficult middle child who never quite fit the Washington mold, and Jamal was the shining star who could do absolutely no wrong. She expected the extended relatives to murmur in agreement. She expected my aunts to rush forward, wrap their arms around her, and comfort her against my supposed cruelty. But the room remained dead silent. The cousins who had just been listening to Jamal brag about his 9-figure corporate merger now stared at the floral-patterned carpet, exchanging highly uncomfortable glances. Aunt Patrice, seated at the head table, slowly lowered her coffee cup to its saucer. The sharp clink of porcelain against porcelain sounded like a gunshot. Patrice did not say a single word in my defense, but her gaze was fixed directly on Vivian, who was suddenly looking incredibly panicked near the dessert station. Patrice already knew the truth about the stolen generational wealth, and her absolute refusal to comfort Brittany was a glaring red flag to everyone else in the room. Jamal, mistaking the heavy silence for awe, puffed out his chest even further. He adjusted the lapels of his custom suit, the one he had likely purchased on a high-interest line of credit opened under a fabricated corporate shell entity. He pointed a finger directly at my face, leaning hard into his role as the righteous patriarch. "You are a disgrace," Jamal said, pitching his voice to reach the very back of the hall where the catering staff stood frozen. "I have spent the last 3 years building a massive portfolio, securing our family's financial future, and the minute things get complicated, you try to steal the credit and the cash. You thought you could bankrupt me with your ridiculous, desperate legal stunts. But you severely underestimated who you are dealing with." He took a step forward, his voice dripping with venomous arrogance. "My lawyers are tearing your life apart right now," Jamal boasted loudly. "Everyone in the industry knows your little tech company is a complete fraud. You are under massive federal investigation for embezzlement, Kendra. And when my countersuit is finished, you are going to be completely ruined. We are talking total liquidation. You will be begging me for a loan by Thanksgiving." He crossed his arms, planting his feet firmly on the floor. He had delivered his lines perfectly. He had set the trap waiting for me to explode. He wanted me to scream, to shout, to lose my temper in front of 100 relatives. He desperately needed me to act like the unstable, jealous sister he claimed me to be, so he could validate his lies to the extended family. I did not shout. I did not defend my company, which was currently sitting on $40 million in cash reserves and completely free of any federal scrutiny. I did not defend my character. I simply looked at the heavy bead of sweat forming at Jamal's temple. I looked at the way Brittany's fingers were trembling against her chest, despite her brave posture. I saw the absolute crushing terror hiding just behind their arrogant eyes. They were cornered animals lashing out because they had absolutely no other play left. Their bank accounts were frozen, their credit lines were exhausted, their luxury cars were repossessed. This banquet hall was their very last stand. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of amusement or joy. It was the calm, terrifying smile of an executioner who had just been handed the signed warrant. "Jealous," I said softly, letting the word echo in the sudden quiet. I did not wait for his response. I turned my back on Jamal and Brittany, leaving them standing awkwardly by the carving station. I walked away, my slate-gray heels clicking against the hardwood perimeter of the banquet hall in a steady, measured rhythm. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a wide path as I moved with total unbothered precision. I headed straight for the elevated DJ booth set up in the far corner of the room. The young DJ, a hired professional who was currently sweating profusely at the sudden suffocating family tension, watched me approach with wide, terrified eyes. "Step aside, please," I said. My tone was polite, but it carried the absolute unyielding authority of a woman who owned the room. I did not argue. He immediately pulled his headphones down around his neck, took his hands off the mixing board and backed away, bumping into a stack of heavy subwoofers. I reached into my tailored dress pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I glanced down at the complex mixing board, quickly identifying the main auxiliary input and the thick HDMI cable routed to the ceiling-mounted projector. Vivian had insisted on renting the massive projector to display a slideshow of curated picture-perfect family memories throughout the dinner. It was a massive screen pulled down directly behind the head table where she and Derek were currently sitting. I picked up the auxiliary cord and plugged it into my phone. I grabbed the HDMI cable and secured the visual connection. I tapped my screen once. The upbeat generic jazz track that had been playing softly in the background cut out with a harsh, abrupt scratch. The sudden absence of music plunged the massive banquet hall into a vacuum of total heavy silence. The smell of roasted chicken and warm dinner rolls hung in the air, completely clashing with the bitter electric tension saturating the room. Vivian, attempting to salvage the facade, forced a brittle laugh and waved her hand at the crowd, trying to pass the silence off as a simple technical malfunction. But nobody laughed back. The extended family simply watched, paralyzed by the sheer gravity of the moment. High above the head table, the motorized projector screen hummed to life. The bright, blinding white light of the projector bulb clicked on, illuminating Vivian and Derek in a stark, unforgiving glare. Vivian jumped in her seat, shielding her eyes and looking around frantically. Derek half stood, his face flushing dark red, but he remained frozen, unsure of what was happening. I reached across the DJ board and picked up the heavy wireless microphone. I flicked the power switch. The green indicator light blinked on. I tapped the metal grill twice. The sharp, heavy thud echoed through the venue's massive speaker system, demanding absolute attention. Every single face in the room turned toward me. Jamal was still standing by the buffet line, but his arrogant posture was rapidly deteriorating. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands dropping to his sides, the fake confidence draining out of him second by second. Brittany had stopped her theatrical crying. Her mouth hung slightly open, her eyes darting between me and the blank glowing screen behind the head table. "Let's talk about Jamal's success, shall we?" I said. My voice echoed through the banquet hall, crystal clear, entirely devoid of anger, yet carrying the devastating weight of absolute truth. I looked directly at my brother across the room. He had wanted a public spectacle. He had demanded an audience. He had weaponized our family's heritage and our relatives' trust to paint himself as a corporate savior and me as a jealous failure. He had built a massive, glittering house of cards, and he had practically begged me to light the match. I tapped the screen of my smartphone. The first document flashed onto the massive screen behind the head table, stretching 20 feet wide for every aunt, uncle, and cousin to see. The massive projector screen hummed as it lowered from the ceiling, casting a harsh, blinding white square of light across the head table. The entire banquet hall was dead silent, the only sound the faint electronic buzz of the cooling fan inside the projector. Every single face in the room, from the catering staff by the kitchen doors to Aunt Valerie clutching her napkin in the front row, was turned toward the glowing display. I stood at the DJ booth, my hand resting casually on the mixing board. I tapped the screen of my smartphone. A high-resolution scan of a legal document filled the 20-foot screen. The bold black text was crisp and unmistakable. The official seal of the county clerk sat prominently in the top right corner, stamped in vivid blue ink. "Let us begin with the foundation of this entire charade," I said. My voice echoed through the microphone, washing over the silent crowd. It was entirely flat, devoid of anger, stripped of any recognizable emotion. It was the voice of a forensic auditor, presenting a final report. "You have all been led to believe that my parents are the victims of a greedy, ruthless daughter. You have been told they are standing strong against my unwarranted attacks, bravely weathering a financial storm they did not cause. Look at the screen." I zoomed in on the center paragraph, magnifying the legal jargon until the letters were large enough for the oldest relatives in the back row to read clearly. "This is the finalized, notarized deed of transfer for the Washington family residence," I announced. "The property is no longer owned by Vivian and Derek. It is currently owned by Apex Holding LLC. I am the sole proprietor of Apex Holding. My parents are not homeowners. They have zero equity. They are legally classified as month-to-month tenants. and as of 9 o'clock this morning, their formal eviction notice was processed by the county sheriff. A collective muffled gasp rippled through the banquet hall. Cousin Maya covered her mouth with both hands. Aunt Valerie leaned forward, her eyes squinting at the glowing screen, as if trying to find a typo. Jamal took a step forward, his chest heaving, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. "Turn that off," he demanded, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Turn that off right now, Kendra. This is a private family matter. You are doctoring documents to make yourself look good." I did not flinch. I did not argue. I simply swiped my thumb across the glass of my phone. The deed vanished. In its place, a piece of corporate letterhead appeared. The logo at the top belonged to one of the most prestigious financial firms in the city. The bold underlined subject line read, "Notice of immediate termination." "But maybe Jamal is going to save the day," I suggested, leaning slightly into the microphone. "He just told you all about his massive 9-figure corporate merger. He just bragged about his board of directors and his absolute power in the tech sector. He just assured everyone here that his success is going to carry this family into the next generation. Let us read what his actual board of directors had to say." I scrolled down to the highlighted paragraphs, centering them on the massive screen. "This is a formal notice of termination with cause," I read aloud, enunciating every syllable with brutal clarity. Jamal was not downsized. He is not spearheading a merger. He is not leading a corporate transition. He was fired 30 days ago for severe documented corporate embezzlement. The banquet hall erupted into shocked whispers. Jamal froze entirely. The arrogant, untouchable posture he had carried all evening instantly evaporated. He seemed to shrink inside his custom-tailored suit, the fabric suddenly looking loose and absurd on his frame. He siphoned over $100,000 from client accounts to maintain his fraudulent lifestyle. I continued, my voice slicing through the rising noise of the crowd. "His former firm is currently cooperating with federal authorities. There is no countersuit against me. There is no federal raid on my company. Jamal is bankrupt, unemployable, and facing massive criminal liability. This is exactly why Vivian stole from the church building fund. This is exactly why they remortgaged the Georgia estate and drained the communal family trust. They robbed you their own blood to keep Jamal out of federal prison." The whispers turned into loud, angry shouts. Several uncles who had invested heavily in the Georgia property stood up from their tables, their faces dark with fury. They turned their glares toward Derek, who was sitting frozen at the head table, staring blankly at his empty dinner plate. Brittany, standing near the buffet line, shook her head frantically. She grabbed Jamal's arm, digging her manicured nails into his sleeve. "Tell them she is lying!" Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking with pure panic. "Tell them it is a fake document, Jamal. Tell them about the merger." I smiled. It was a cold, calculated expression. I swiped my screen for the third and final time. The corporate letterhead disappeared. A chain of private emails took its place. The timestamps were from last week. I zoomed in on the sender address. It read, Brittany, Washington. The recipient was a prominent local bankruptcy and divorce attorney. "This one is my personal favorite," I announced. "Let us look at how the loving, supportive wife handles Jamal's stress. Let us see the absolute loyalty that comes with a cubic zirconia tennis bracelet." Brittany went completely still. Her hand dropped from Jamal's arm as if he had caught fire. The color drained from her face, leaving her foundation looking like a pale, chalky mask. In these emails, Brittany is frantically seeking legal counsel to manage a secret $150,000 credit card debt. "She racked up under a separate maiden name," I said, reading the text directly off the glowing screen. "But the best part is her exit strategy. Let me read her exact words to her lawyer." I cleared my throat, ensuring perfect projection. "I need to hold off on filing the divorce papers until my husband secures the liquid cash from his parents' family trust. Once that money hits his joint account, I need to know how to legally leverage it to clear my personal debt before serving him the papers." The golden child facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The entire banquet hall exploded into absolute chaos. The carefully maintained illusion of Washington family supremacy collapsed under the crushing weight of undeniable documented truth. Jamal slowly turned his head to look at his wife. The panic in his eyes morphed into pure, venomous betrayal. "You were going to leave me!" he shouted, his voice cracking loudly in front of the entire extended family. "You were going to steal my parents' money and run!" "I did not know you were broke!" Brittany screamed back at him, all pretense of elegance vanishing in an instant. "You told me the merger was real. You told me you had millions coming in. You are a fraud, Jamal. You bought me fake diamonds and dragged me into a criminal investigation. I am not going down for your embezzlement. I am filing the papers tomorrow." They began shouting over each other, a vicious, ugly screaming match unfolding right next to the carving station. Aunts and uncles abandoned their tables, pointing fingers and demanding answers about the Georgia estate. The polite Southern decorum had been entirely burned away. At the head table, Vivian saw the absolute destruction of her perfect image. She saw the wealthy aunts turning away in disgust. She saw the community she had ruled for decades realizing she was nothing more than a common thief. She went for her ultimate, most reliable manipulation tactic. Vivian gasped loudly, pressing the back of her hand to her forehead. She fluttered her eyelashes, let out a weak, theatrical cry, and swooned backward, expecting Derek or one of the nearby cousins to rush forward and catch her. She expected the room to stop, the anger to melt into concern, and the focus to shift back to her fragile well-being. But this time nobody moved. Nobody rushed forward. Nobody cried out in panic. Vivian hit the floral patterned carpet. Hard. The dull thud of her body impacting the floor was clearly audible over the shouting. She lay there, blinking up at the ceiling in genuine shock. Several aunts simply looked down at her from their tables, their expressions reflecting nothing but absolute icy disdain. The ultimate rejection had been delivered. The weeping mother routine had officially lost its power. Derek, watching his wife lying ignored on the floor, his son publicly exposed as a criminal, and his daughter-in-law screaming about divorce, finally snapped. The humiliation was too great. The exposure was too thorough. He lunged out from behind the head table. His face was a mask of pure, unhinged rage. He charged directly toward the DJ booth, his fists balled tightly at his sides, his eyes locked onto me with violent intent. "Turn it off!" he roared, his voice tearing through the ambient chaos. "Turn off the screen right now, Kendra." I did not step back. I did not drop the microphone. I watched him charge entirely unfazed. Before Derek could cover half the distance to the booth, Aunt Patrice stepped directly into the center aisle. She moved with a speed and agility that belied her age. She planted her feet firmly, her posture an immovable wall of authority. But Patrice was not alone. Cousin Maya stepped up beside her. Then Uncle Marcus. Then Aunt Valerie. A dozen cousins, the very people whose college funds and inheritances had been stolen to cover Jamal's debts, surged forward. They formed a solid human barricade between Derek and the DJ booth. "Do not take another step," Robert Patrice commanded. Her voice was thunderous, cutting through the hall with absolute finality. Derek slammed to a halt, breathing heavily, entirely surrounded by the family he had betrayed. The cousins shouted him down, their voices overlapping in a chorus of justified outrage, demanding their money, demanding answers, demanding he face the ruin he had brought upon them all. I stood behind the mixing board watching the empire of lies burn to the ground. I unplugged my phone from the auxiliary cord and slipped it back into my dress pocket. I did not need the microphone anymore. The truth had done its job. The massive projector screen hummed as it lowered from the ceiling, casting a harsh, blinding white square of light across the head table. The entire banquet hall was dead silent, the only sound the faint electronic buzz of the cooling fan inside the projector. Every single face in the room, from the catering staff by the kitchen doors to Aunt Valerie clutching her napkin in the front row, was turned toward the glowing display. I stood at the DJ booth, my hand resting casually on the mixing board. I tapped the screen of my smartphone. A high-resolution scan of a legal document filled the 20-foot screen. The bold black text was crisp and unmistakable. The official seal of the county clerk sat prominently in the top right corner, stamped in vivid blue ink. "Let us begin with the foundation of this entire charade," I said. My voice echoed through the microphone, washing over the silent crowd. It was entirely flat, devoid of anger, stripped of any recognizable emotion. It was the voice of a forensic auditor presenting a final report. "You have all been led to believe that my parents are the victims of a greedy, ruthless daughter. You have been told they are standing strong against my unwarranted attacks, bravely weathering a financial storm they did not cause. Look at the screen. I zoomed in on the center paragraph, magnifying the legal jargon until the letters were large enough for the oldest relatives in the back row to read clearly. This is the finalized notarized deed of transfer for the Washington family residence, I announced. The property is no longer owned by Vivian and Derek. It is currently owned by Apex Holding LLC. I am the sole proprietor of Apex Holding. My parents are not homeowners. They have zero equity. They are legally classified as month-to-month tenants. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, their formal eviction notice was processed by the county sheriff. A collective muffled gasp rippled through the banquet hall. Cousin Maya covered her mouth with both hands. Aunt Valerie leaned forward, her eyes squinting at the glowing screen as if trying to find a typo. Jamal took a step forward, heaving his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. "Turn that off," he demanded, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Turn that off right now, Kendra. This is a private family matter. You are doctoring documents to make yourself look good." I did not flinch. I did not argue. I simply swiped my thumb across the glass of my phone. The deed vanished. In its place, a piece of corporate letterhead appeared. The logo at the top belonged to one of the most prestigious financial firms in the city. The bold underlined subject line read, "Notice of immediate termination." "But maybe Jamal is going to save the day," I suggested, leaning slightly into the microphone. "He just told you all about his massive 9-figure corporate merger. He just bragged about his board of directors and his absolute power in the tech sector. He just assured everyone here that his success is going to carry this family into the next generation. Let us read what his actual board of directors had to say." I scrolled down to the highlighted paragraphs, centering them on the massive screen. "This is a formal notice of termination with cause," I read aloud, enunciating every syllable with brutal clarity. Jamal was not downsized. He is not spearheading a merger. He is not leading a corporate transition. He was fired 30 days ago for severe documented corporate embezzlement. The banquet hall erupted into shocked whispers. Jamal froze entirely. The arrogant, untouchable posture he had carried all evening instantly evaporated. He seemed to shrink inside his custom-tailored suit, the fabric suddenly looking loose and absurd on his frame. He siphoned over $100,000 from client accounts to maintain his fraudulent lifestyle. I continued, my voice slicing through the rising noise of the crowd. His former firm is currently cooperating with federal authorities. There is no countersuit against me. There is no federal raid on my company. Jamal is bankrupt, unemployable, and facing massive criminal liability. This is exactly why Vivian stole from the church building fund. This is exactly why they remortgaged the Georgia estate and drained the communal family trust. They robbed you their own blood to keep Jamal out of federal prison. The whispers turned into loud, angry shouts. Several uncles who had invested heavily in the Georgia property stood up from their tables, their faces dark with fury. They turned their glares toward Derek, who was sitting frozen at the head table staring blankly at his empty dinner plate. Brittany, standing near the buffet line, shook her head frantically. She grabbed Jamal's arm, digging her manicured nails into his sleeve. "Tell them she is lying!" Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking with pure panic. "Tell them it is a fake document, Jamal. Tell them about the merger." I smiled. It was a cold, calculated expression. I swiped my screen for the third and final time. The corporate letterhead disappeared. A chain of private emails took its place. The timestamps were from last week. I zoomed in on the sender address. It read, Brittany, Washington. The recipient was a prominent local bankruptcy and divorce attorney. "This one is my personal favorite," I announced. "Let us look at how the loving, supportive wife handles Jamal's stress. Let us see the absolute loyalty that comes with a cubic zirconia tennis bracelet." Brittany went completely still. Her hand dropped from Jamal's arm as if he had caught fire. The color drained from her face, leaving her foundation looking like a pale, chalky mask. In these emails, Brittany is frantically seeking legal counsel to manage a secret $150,000 credit card debt. She racked up under a separate maiden name, I said, reading the text directly off the glowing screen. But the best part is her exit strategy. Let me read her exact words to her lawyer. I cleared my throat, ensuring perfect projection. I need to hold off on filing the divorce papers until my husband secures the liquid cash from his parents' family trust. Once that money hits his joint account, I need to know how to legally leverage it to clear my personal debt before serving him the papers. The golden child facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The entire banquet hall exploded into absolute chaos. The carefully maintained illusion of Washington family supremacy collapsed under the crushing weight of undeniable documented truth. Jamal slowly turned his head to look at his wife. The panic in his eyes morphed into pure venomous betrayal. "You were going to leave me," he shouted, his voice cracking loudly in front of the entire extended family. "You were going to steal my parents' money and run." "I did not know you were broke," Brittany screamed back at him, all pretense of elegance vanishing in an instant. "You told me the merger was real. You told me you had millions coming in. You are a fraud, Jamal. You bought me fake diamonds and dragged me into a criminal investigation. I am not going down for your embezzlement. I am filing the papers tomorrow." They began shouting over each other, a vicious, ugly screaming match unfolding right next to the carving station. Aunts and uncles abandoned their tables, pointing fingers and demanding answers about the Georgia estate. The polite Southern decorum had been entirely burned away. At the head table, Vivian saw the absolute destruction of her perfect image. She saw the wealthy aunts turning away in disgust. She saw the community she had ruled for decades realizing she was nothing more than a common thief. She went for her ultimate, most reliable manipulation tactic. Vivian gasped loudly, pressing the back of her hand to her forehead. She fluttered her eyelashes, let out a weak theatrical cry, and swooned backward, expecting Derek or one of the nearby cousins to rush forward and catch her. She expected the room to stop, the anger to melt into concern, and the focus to shift back to her fragile well-being. But this time nobody moved. Nobody rushed forward. Nobody cried out in panic. Vivian hit the floral-patterned carpet hard. The dull thud of her body impacting the floor was clearly audible over the shouting. She lay there blinking up at the ceiling in genuine shock. Several aunts simply looked down at her from their tables, their expressions reflecting nothing but absolute icy disdain. The ultimate rejection had been delivered. The weeping mother routine had officially lost its power. Derek, watching his wife lying ignored on the floor, his son publicly exposed as a criminal and his daughter-in-law screaming about divorce, finally snapped. The humiliation was too great. The exposure was too thorough. He lunged out from behind the head table. His face was a mask of pure, unhinged rage. He charged directly toward the DJ booth, his fists balled tightly at his sides, his eyes locked onto me with violent intent. "Turn it off!" he roared, his voice tearing through the ambient chaos. "Turn off the screen right now, Kendra." I did not step back. I did not drop the microphone. I watched him charge entirely unfazed. Before Derek could cover half the distance to the booth, Aunt Patrice stepped directly into the center aisle. She moved with a speed and agility that belied her age. She planted her feet firmly, her posture an immovable wall of authority. But Patrice was not alone. Cousin Maya stepped up beside her. Then Uncle Marcus. Then Aunt Valerie. A dozen cousins, the very people whose college funds and inheritances had been stolen to cover Jamal's debts, surged forward. They formed a solid human barricade between Derek and the DJ booth. "Do not take another step," Robert Patrice commanded. Her voice was thunderous, cutting through the hall with absolute finality. Derek slammed to a halt, breathing heavily, entirely surrounded by the family he had betrayed. The cousins shouted him down, their voices overlapping in a chorus of justified outrage, demanding their money, demanding answers, demanding he face the ruin he had brought upon them all. I stood behind the mixing board watching the empire of lies burn to the ground. I unplugged my phone from the auxiliary cord and slipped it back into my dress pocket. I did not need the microphone anymore. The truth had done its job. Exactly 7 days after the banquet hall implosion, the legal clock ran out. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when the county sheriffs arrived at the Georgia estate. The heavy, unmistakable thud of their boots on the pristine mahogany porch echoed like a gavel striking a sound block. 2 squad cars were parked at slanted, aggressive angles in the circular driveway, their lights flashing in rhythmic, silent warning. Behind them idled a massive commercial moving truck, its air brakes hissing loudly in the quiet, affluent neighborhood. The changing of the locks took less than 15 minutes. The physical removal of the occupants took slightly longer. I sat parked across the street in the plush leather seat of my sleek black sedan. The engine hummed quietly, keeping the climate control perfectly balanced. My lawyer, a brilliant, ruthless woman named Sarah, sat in the passenger seat beside me, organizing a stack of heavy legal folders. We watched the scene unfold through the tinted privacy glass with total surgical detachment. Vivian and Derek were forced out the front door and onto the manicured front lawn. Vivian was wearing a silk robe, her hair wrapped in a silk scarf, her face contorted in a mask of absolute uncomprehending horror. She watched as large, indifferent men in work uniforms began carrying out the physical manifestations of her fabricated elite status. The velvet couches she had purchased to impress the church board, the imitation crystal vases, the heavy ornate dining chairs where she had once sat and demanded I hand over my company to Jamal. All of it was being unceremoniously dumped onto the damp morning grass. Jamal stood a few feet away, clutching a duffel bag to his chest. He looked haggard, deeply exhausted, the manic arrogance from the banquet hall entirely drained from his posture. He was wearing sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt, looking like a man who had not slept in a week. Vivian spotted my vehicle. She knew the license plate. She pushed past a deputy and marched directly across the street, her bare feet slapping against the cold asphalt. She slammed her open palms against my passenger side window, her face pressed near the glass. She was screaming, her voice muffled but frantic, demanding that I stop the movers, demanding that I let them stay, demanding that I respect her authority as my mother. I pressed the button to lower the window exactly 2 inches. The sharp morning air rushed in, carrying the sound of her desperation. "You have 5 minutes to clear the perimeter before I have you cited for trespassing on private commercial property," I stated. My voice was completely flat, stripped of any familial warmth. "You are loitering on a construction site." Vivian gasped, stepping back as if physically struck. "Construction site," she stammered, looking wildly between me and the house. I did not explain. I simply rolled the window back up, sealing her out completely. I turned to Sarah and held out my hand. She placed a heavy silver pen in my palm and opened the top folder. The document inside was a finalized commercial real estate contract. I was not moving into the house. I had absolutely no desire to live inside the physical monument of my childhood trauma. I did not want to walk the halls where I had been constantly diminished, ignored, and belittled. Instead, I signed my name on the dotted line, officially transferring the deed from my holding company to a premier commercial developer. The house, the manicured lawn, the gaudy porch, all of it was scheduled to be leveled to the dirt by the end of the month. In its place, a modern high-density condominium complex would be built. The legacy Vivian had stolen to protect was going to be reduced to rubble and paved over with fresh concrete. Across the street, Jamal decided he had seen enough. He turned his back on his weeping mother and stomped toward his luxury SUV parked near the curb. He grabbed the door handle, desperate to escape the humiliation of the neighbors who were currently peeking through their blinds to watch the mighty Washington family fall. Before Jamal could open the door, a heavy diesel engine roared to life at the end of the street. A flatbed tow truck barreled around the corner, its yellow lights flashing aggressively. It pulled up directly alongside Jamal's vehicle, expertly angling its heavy steel frame to completely block the SUV from moving. The repo driver, a burly man holding a clipboard, jumped down from the cab and walked straight toward the front axle with a set of heavy steel chains. Jamal began screaming, waving his arms frantically, insisting there was a mistake, insisting he just needed one more day to clear the funds. The driver did not even look at him. The bank had finally come to collect. The heavy chains rattled loudly as they were hooked beneath the bumper. Jamal stood on the sidewalk, entirely powerless, watching his last remaining symbol of wealth being hoisted into the air and towed away down the street. The golden child was officially grounded. The fallout from that morning was remarkably swift and exceptionally brutal. The disintegration of Jamal and Brittany's marriage happened at a speed that left the local gossip circles breathless. Brittany filed the divorce papers less than 48 hours after the banquet hall incident. She did not ask for a quiet, amicable split. She hired a vicious litigation attorney and threw Jamal entirely under the bus, submitting his text messages, his financial lies, and his erratic behavior directly into the public court record to save herself from his impending criminal liability. With his corporate assets frozen by federal investigators and his reputation completely destroyed by the embezzlement revelation, Jamal had absolutely nowhere to hide. His former corporate friends blocked his number. The board of directors who once praised his aggressive tactics now publicly denounced him. I was forced to move into a cheap, cramped studio apartment on the industrial edge of the city. The walls were thin, the carpet was stained, and the hallway constantly smelled of stale cigarettes and boiled cabbage. It was a jarring, catastrophic shift from the custom suits and luxury high-rises he had arrogantly paraded around just weeks prior. But the absolute peak of his new reality was his employment. Stripped of his credentials and facing massive legal debts, Jamal had to take whatever work he could find to satisfy the court mandates. He was currently working a minimum wage shift at a local retail electronics store. He wore a stiff, itchy blue polo shirt with a plastic name tag pinned to his chest. He spent 8 hours a day standing behind a cash register, ringing up charging cables, and answering complaints from irritable customers. A significant portion of his meager paycheck was automatically garnished by the state and routed directly to my holding company to satisfy the restitution order. Every hour he worked, he was physically paying me back the money he had attempted to steal. Vivian and Derek faced a similar devastating exile. Stripped of the house, the money, and the fabricated prestige, they were forced to rent a tiny rundown apartment 2 towns over. The transition destroyed them socially. The church board, armed with the forensic ledger I had provided to Aunt Patrice, permanently excommunicated them. The wealthy social circles they had spent decades manipulating completely blacklisted them. Their phones stopped ringing. There were no more invitations to galas, no more seats at the head table, no more community influence. They sat alone in a cramped living room, filled with the few cheap pieces of furniture they could salvage, entirely stripped of the elite status they had weaponized against me for my entire life. I was sitting in my home office when my smartphone vibrated against the desk. The screen lit up with an incoming text message from an unsaved number, but I recognized the digits immediately. It was Vivian. I picked up the device and read the message glowing on the screen. "We have nothing. Are you happy now?" I stared at the words for a long moment. I did not feel a sudden rush of vindictive joy. I did not feel a twinge of lingering guilt. I felt absolutely nothing, a profound, hollow apathy. They had built their own cage, locked the door from the inside, and swallowed the key. I tapped the settings icon on the top right corner of the screen. I selected the block contact option. A prompt asked me to confirm. I tapped yes. Then I deleted the entire message thread, permanently erasing her digital footprint from my device. I placed the phone back on the desk and returned my attention to my quarterly profit projections. Several months later, the toxic smoke had finally cleared, leaving behind a crisp, clean reality. I sat on the sprawling outdoor balcony of my penthouse, a cup of hot herbal tea warming my hands. The city skyline stretched out before me, a glittering sea of glass and steel, bathed in the warm golden light of late Sunday afternoon. The gentle breeze carried the distant ambient sounds of the city below, but up here everything was completely serene. Nay, I had reclaimed my peace, my wealth, and my dignity. The chime of my front doorbell echoed softly from inside the apartment. It was not a threat. It was not a collection agency or an angry relative demanding unearned loyalty. I walked through the sliding glass doors and pulled open the heavy front door. Aunt Patrice stood in the hallway holding a massive foil-covered tray that smelled incredibly of baked macaroni and cheese. Beside her stood my cousin Malik, carrying a stack of board games and a bottle of sparkling cider, and Tasha laughing brightly at a joke Malik had just told. They poured into my apartment, bringing an immediate, authentic warmth that completely filled the space. There was no posturing, there were no passive-aggressive comments about my career, no subtle jabs about my lifestyle, no demands to shrink myself to make someone else feel bigger. We gathered in the massive kitchen, unpacking the food, sharing stories about our week, and laughing with a volume and freedom that had never been permitted inside the old Georgia estate. This was my chosen family. They were the relatives who had respected my boundaries, who had demanded accountability, and who had supported my success without an ounce of jealousy. The toxic branches of the Washington family tree had been aggressively and permanently pruned, leaving only the healthy, vibrant growth behind. As I sat at the head of my own dining table, watching Patrice deal out cards for a game, I reflected on the long, brutal journey that had brought me to this exact moment. For centuries, society has instructed women to be the peacekeepers at their own expense. We are told to shrink our ambitions, to swallow our pride, to absorb the slights and the blatant disrespect just to keep the family unit intact. We are conditioned to accept less so that insecure men and manipulative matriarchs can feel like they are more. I completely refuse that narrative. I refuse to be the sacrificial lamb on the altar of Jamal's fragile ego. I refuse to let Vivian weaponize my loyalty to fund her delusions. I demanded respect, and when it was denied, I utilized every single resource at my disposal to legally and methodically dismantle the systems of abuse they had relied upon. The path to freedom is rarely quiet, and it is almost never polite. It requires you to know the exact unyielding value of your own worth. It requires you to build walls so high and so thick that toxicity cannot even peek over the top. It requires you to aggressively protect your energy, your assets, and your peace of mind. And sometimes, when the people who are supposed to protect you decide to become your greatest threat, it requires you to serve karma with a cold, unwavering smile. I lifted my glass of sparkling cider, catching Malik's eye across the table. We clinked our glasses together, the crisp sound ringing out in the bright, joyful room. I took a slow sip, savoring the taste of absolute, uncompromised victory. The most profound lesson from this story is that shared blood does not obligate you to endure abuse, manipulation, or financial exploitation. Toxic family systems thrive on silence and the preservation of a fabricated image over the well-being of individuals. Breaking free requires immense courage and the unwavering enforcement of strict boundaries. True success and peace are found when you strip away the toxic expectations of others and build a life grounded in absolute authenticity and self-respect. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below.